You open your palm and imagine a coin warming there. A small, bright decision that has already lived more lives than most commanders. You're standing in the late Republic where money smells faintly of camp smoke and triumph perfume. And you watch how the old countryside economy, rents in kind, neighbors swapping favors measured in goats, starts taking orders from silver that clinks with imperial ambition. You pace slowly, because the story moves better when you breathe with it. First a farmer's market, then a muster field, then a treasury door that swings wider with each conquest. Begin with the city before it calls itself the world. Taxes are personal and occasional. Tributum levied when war demands it, remitted when peace pretends to last. Counted by censors who keep lists the way gardeners keep hedges. The state collects grain and coin in a lumpy mix. The neighbors are Latins and Italians, and the roads are still practicing being arteries. Then you feel the map tilt. Spain's mines join the conversation. Sicily's grain becomes habit rather than gift. New provinces arrive with their own fiscal weather, and Rome, practical as a carpenter, reaches for a sturdier frame. You turn the coin between finger and thumb and feel a new rhythm begin around 211 BC. The denarius shows up. Silver, clean, persuasive, worth 10 asses at first and then, by a quiet arithmetic the city learns in its sleep. 16. Mainstream anchor to keep your feet on the paving stones. The denarius, introduced during the Second Punic War, becomes the backbone of Roman silver currency for centuries, the piece that pays soldiers, settles accounts, and lets markets speak in a language more precise than promises. Republican bronze doesn't vanish. It becomes small change, the friend of bakers and bath keepers, while silver takes on speeches about legions and loans. Conquest funds the system at the start the way a windfall funds a shop. Spoils, indemnities, and newly taxable lands flow into an institution that still looks domestic. Tables, tablets, stern clerks, a room that echoes when someone mutters. Next, you stand at the aerarium and hear the clatter of bars, the scratch of stylus, the satisfied cough a quester makes when numbers finally agree. The wars are expensive, yes, but winning them turns other people's storage into your budget. Gentle joke 1, a clerk says. Victory is liquid, by which he means silver. His colleague says. Victory is heavy, by which he means carrying it. The more Rome grows, the more coin solves coordination. Grain for the city? Pay shippers. Tents, sandals, mules, catapult rope? Pay contractors. Roads and bridges? Pay crews who will happily argue about gravel if you don't keep the coins moving. Coin is portable command. It lets governors in far provinces buy loyalty and logistics without sending home for permission. You walk a dock at Ostia and count amphorae like heartbeats while small bronze asses walk from hand to hand faster than a rumor on market day. Soldiers teach you the budget in one lesson. They like to be paid on time. A republic that once asked citizens to serve for honor and harvest later learns to make regular cash feel like virtue. Pay lists lengthen, donatives thicken. The man with the general's baton quickly learns that coin is discipline you can jingle. When the city tips into the age of one-man decision-making, Augustus stepping softly while everything changes, the paymaster's job becomes policy. A standing army means a standing flow, taxes in, silver out, loyalty in the middle kept at a comfortable temperature. You pause with an eyebrow raised at the other half of the ledger. Taxes. Not just tributum on citizens anymore, but provincial levies in coin and kind, shepherded by publicani who arrive with bids, contracts, and appetites. Here is where the imperial habit starts to crystallize. Use local elites to gather dues. Take grain where coin trust ends. Keep the calendar predictable enough that farmers can sleep. Rome discovers that predictability is almost as nourishing as bread. The city invents routine, and routine invents the empire right back. Quirky tidbit to tuck behind the ear. At triumphs, generals sometimes scatter small coin to the crowd, largesse as soft policy, and the children of Rome learn to read emperors by the quality of their reign. A few denarii fall into the Tiber every celebration, accidental offerings to a river that does not need money but enjoys the joke. Somewhere a diver practices the most dangerous profession in the city, retrieving political goodwill from slippery stones. Historians still argue whether the late Republican monetary reforms amounted to a coherent plan or a patchwork of improvisations that only looks like strategy from a comfortable distance. Was the denarius system designed as a stable architecture or hammered together by quartermasters who refused to run out of pay? You decide. The truth lives near the workshops, intention and necessity shaking hands while smiths keep the furnaces honest. You listen for inflation and hear only whispers at first. Silver content holds decently. Bronze buys bread without raising its voice. Prices wobble more from harvests and wars than from coin itself. But you can already taste the temptation baked into the system. A government that pays a nettle can always shave the edges of honesty. Just a little less silver here, just a little more alloy there. A quiet way for policy to wink. For now, under the better weather of competent hands, the coin keeps its dignity and the market keeps its patience. What really changes, what you feel in your shoulders, is centralization. The Republic could lean on emergency levies and neighborly credit. The Empire needs a machine that hums every day. It inherits temples of coin and builds corridors of grain. The Annona begins to look like clockwork, oil and wheat flowing on schedules that teach the city to expect dinner. Governors stop being guests and become managers. Mints stop being occasional and become the empire's heartbeat. You share a nod with an engraver carving a new emperor's face and realize that money is also a script. It tells distant villages who currently pretends to be eternal. Inside houses, cash changes manners. Rents are reckoned more in sums than in sacks. Dowries are written with numerals that make uncles squint. A freedman banker buys a warehouse because he believes interest is a kind of weather that visits those who have roofs. In alleys, bronze coins pile like the small decisions of ordinary days. Bread or beans, lamp oil now or sandals next month, and the city, soothed by choice, forgives the empire many of its ruder habits as long as the scales stay honest. You finish by rolling the coin across your knuckles, showy, but the city has taught you, and letting it drop back into your palm with a soft clink that sounds like a promise and a warning. Promise. Coin lets a farmer in Numidia and a baker on the Aventine cooperate without knowing each other's grandfathers. Warning. Coin invites rulers to solve hard problems with soft metal. For now, you filed the promise on top. The Julio Claudians are already arriving with an organizer's clipboard. Denominations in neat ladders, mints under watchful eyes, and a sense that if money behaves, legions will too. You take a last slow breath in the cool shade of the treasury door and step forward into the imperial purse. You don't step. You glide from the treasury's cool shade into a workshop where order hums like a hive. Augustus has tidied the money. You feel at first as calm in your wrist when a coin lands with the weight you expect. No surprises, no hollow ring. And then as a ladder you can climb with your fingers, gold at the top, then silver, then brass and copper carrying the daily chatter of bread, ferry fares, and lamp oil. You lay the pieces out on a wooden table and watch them behave. Gold first, the aureus, small, dense, ceremonious, worth a neat stack of denarii, 20 in the arithmetic you'll hear at most counters, stamped with a face that explains who currently lives in eternity. Silver next, the denarius, your workhorse since Section 1, confident at roughly 4 sestertii and 16 asses, a coin that pays soldiers without raising its voice. Then the bronzes, the big brass sestertius that looks like a plate for olives, the paler brass stipendius, the copper as, the semis that likes to split the difference, and the humble quadrans, a quarter as that buys entry to small pleasures and cheaper baths. You notice how your hands relax. This is a set, not a shout. Gentle joke 1. A shopkeeper says he loves the sestertius because it's as visible as a boast. His clerk says he prefers the as because it apologizes less when dropped. Augustus choreographs more than metal. He choreographs trust. Gold and silver mints move under imperial eye. One busy at Lugdunum, modern Lyon, where furnaces learn to speak Latin in Gaulish accents, others in Rome when politics and logistics approve, while the great bronzes, by old decorum, carry SC, Senatus Consulto, as if to say the Senate still writes footnotes in the empire's ledger. Mainstream anchor, steady as the bench, under the early principate, the emperor controls precious metal coinage. Senatorial authority remains nominal over bronze, signaled by SC on many issues, while Lugdunum serves as the principal mint for gold and silver in Augustus's and Tiberius's day. You tilt the sestertius under the light and see the letters catch like tiny hinges holding tradition to change. Purity whispers its own lullaby. The denarius under Augustus and Tiberius keeps a high silver standard, enough that a money changer closes his eyes, flicks, and hears honesty in the note. Weights settle into habits. The aureus near 8 grams, trimmed later by clever emperors who know arithmetic can raise revenue without asking. The denarius hovering where soldiers smile and bakers do not mutter. You note how consistency itself becomes policy. If your coin looks the same in Narbo and in Antioch, your orders travel without explanations. Propaganda keeps time on both faces. One side promises a person, the other promises a mood, px, salvs, adxis pater patri, big nouns that make small change feel like a civic handshake. Tiberius, less talkative than his adoptive father, keeps type stable. The mint at Lugdunum strikes silver so uniformly that hoards centuries later look like someone's tidy desk drawer. Quirky tidbit. One of those Tiberian denarii, showing a seated female figure, acquired a second life in Christian memory as the tribute penny, the coin imagined in a gospel question about Caesar and taxes. The irony of an emperor shy about spectacle starring in sermons does not escape the mint boys, who would have laughed if they'd known. You move along the counter where a numularius, a tester, taps coins, clips one, compares filings, and nods with the professional serenity of a man who has survived 3 forgers and a drought. Augustus's order gives him less to scowl at. Fewer rogue standards mean fewer arguments staged in alleys. Provincial cities mirror the system in bronze, weaving local pride into a wider rhythm, while imperial silver stitches the provinces to paydays that arrive on time. The empire learns a trick. If money looks familiar, strangers behave like neighbors. Taxes rehearse the new script. Instead of improvised levies, you feel the pressure towards schedules. tributary provinces remitting in coin and in kind, customs posts collecting dues at predictable gates, Italy enjoying its exemption while the provinces discover how predictable translates into long lines that nonetheless end with receipts. Grain flows alongside coin, known as shipments that keep Rome fed and the soldiers in you merciful. If a harvest frowns or a river sulks, bronze buys bread and silver finds its way to keys where men who like ropes more than rhetoric solve problems with knots. Historians still argue whether the senatorial SC on bronzes indicated real administrative control in the early empire or a symbolic deference masking imperial direction. Did the Senate truly manage large bronze output? Or did emperors quietly cue the choreography while letting old letters perform continuity? The iconography suggests collaboration. Audits and reality suggest the princeps held the metronome. You enjoy the ambiguity because it sounds like Rome telling two truths at once to keep everyone's pride fed. You follow a cohort's payday and see how denominations grease morale. The officer counts in aurei because sums like to feel important. The ranker heaps denarii and hears months becoming meals. Wives and camp followers prefer sestertii because markets like coins that weigh stories as well as bread. Pay isn't just arithmetic, it's choreography. A chest opens, a name is called, a stack lands, a salute clicks, the next name arrives. You can almost hear the empire's pulse in the repetition, a heartbeat measured in silver. Nero wanders briefly through your mind at the end of this orderly hallway, the first emperor to press the debasement lever hard enough that money changers raise eyebrows. Not yet in your hand, but within the Julio Claudian room you can already smell the temptation. Raise pay, build spectacles, rebuild after fires, and finagle the finest just enough to make auditors nod and purists sigh. For now, though, the system holds. The ladder of denominations gives scale to decisions. Endow a colony? Aurei. Pay a legion? Denarii. Pay the street and tip the crew? Sestertii and asses tossed with satisfaction you can hear. Light joke too. A tavern keeper posts a sign. We prefer sestertii. Denarii make the till proud. Aurei make us nervous. And a centurion pays with a handful of small change because he likes to hear the clatter outsing his men. The sign works anyway. Dignity arrives in bronze at the end of the week. Mint control sprawls like a quiet map. You mark lugdunum for gold and silver, Rome for bronzes and prestige, provincial mints for local needs, all of them learning to stamp faces that citizens recognize too quickly to read. Counterfeiting never sleeps, sweating coins, plating base cores, but centralized standards make the cheats easier to catch. The numularius earns his bread by being boringly suspicious. Your fingers grow sensitive to sound, clean silver sings, bad flans cough. The Senate's role survives not only in initials but in habit. Decrees about types, commemorations of roads and aqueducts, honors transmuted into metal. The bronzes become little bulletin boards for a class happy to be remembered in pockets. Meanwhile, the emperor uses precious metal to tell the world who heirs are, what victories count, and which abstract nouns deserve to travel. Felicitas secretas, the promise that stability has a portrait. Mainstream fact to nail to the bench, Augustus's reform era. In practice, a consolidation rather than a single law revolution stabilized the trimetallic system, gold aureus, silver denarius, and a structured brass/copper bronze, whose denominations interacted at fixed ratios for ordinary accounting, with imperial control of precious metals and senatorial oversight, at least formulaically, of bronzes. The system's reliability under Augustus and Tiberius fostered price stability by comparison with the improvisations that would characterize later crises. You end your visit to the Julio Claudians by palming a sestertius so wide it cools your hand. On its reverse, a bridge arches, a personification smiles, and you feel how money can make infrastructure feel personal. Light joke 3. A boy asks whether bridges exist because coins show them. His mother says coins show them because boys ask such questions. The nummularius says both are true if you bring the right light. As you walk out, you tuck 2 recognitions into your sleeve. First, denomination clarity is mercy. It lets farmers, soldiers, bakers, and bankers argue in the same grammar. Second, uniform fineness is diplomacy. It lets a mint in Gaul and a market in Judea trust each other without meeting. The calm you felt at the table isn't nostalgia, it's policy. Soon enough, a young emperor with artistic ambitions will discover that fineness is a lever, and the quiet, steady ring of your denarius will acquire a slightly thinner echo. For tonight, let the coins rest in their trays, gold at the top like a polite sun, silver arrayed like moonlight, bronze warm as bread, and breathe with the sense that order, once invented, prefers to linger. You feel it first in your fingertips, not your eyes, the way a denarius no longer presses its old weight into your palm. You're at the Rome Mint in the early 60s CE, watching dies kiss bright flans while a foreman counts aloud with the serenity of someone who has learned to multiply by shaving. The city has just survived fire and performance, marble and morale. It needs roofs, games, stipends, brick, and blames soft cousin, money. Nero solves the problem the Roman way. He changes the metal and lets the portrait do the talking. Lay out the ladder you learned under Augustus and Tiberius. Now feel the steps settle a little lower. The aureus that used to run around 8 grams, the 40 per libra standard, quietly becomes 45 per pound, closer to 7.3 grams. The denarius, once c. 84 per pound of silver, around 3.9 g, slides to 96 per pound, almost equals 3.4 g, and loses a few points of fineness along the way, down from near sterling to something like 90-odd%. Mainstream fact to tack to the mint wall. Under Nero's reform, c. 64 c, the aureus was reduced from 40 to 45 to the Roman pound, and the denarius's weight and purity both declined, inaugurating an imperial habit future emperors would revisit whenever arithmetic frowned. The ring is still silver, the echo is thinner. You stand beside a nummularius, a tester, who taps, scrapes, and nods with professional melancholy. He hears what you hear, honesty modified, not abandoned. The foreman explains it with a shrug large enough to include a burned city, rebuilding projects, donatives for legions that prefer punctuality, and spectacles for a populace that sleeps better after clapping. We stretch the blanket, he says, pinching the air. It still covers the feet. On the dais, the emperor's face thickens into lifelike portraiture. Nero's neck, Nero's laurel, Nero's jaw that looks like it doesn't skip dinner. Reverse types boast secretas avgvsti, salvs, a temple here, a victory there. You notice a sly logic, improve the art while adjusting the alloy. If coins must be slightly less silver, let them be more beautiful. If trust must bend, let flattery brace it. You admit it works on you a little. The reverse shows a personified piece who seems genuinely invested in your household budget. In alleys, prices listen. Bread stays mostly polite. Oil makes a few suggestions. Rents raise one eyebrow. Soldiers compare pay to shopping and decide to keep saluting. Inflation doesn't arrive as a drumline. It moves like a rumor. A thumb more expensive here, a cup dearer there. Historians still argue whether Nero's debasement produced immediate, general price rises or whether markets absorbed the change gradually, buffered by habit, taxes in kind, and the city's affection for routine. Documentary scraps and hoards let you feel pressure, not panic. You visit a banker who wears suspicion like a signet. He adjusts his scales by a hair and begins offering marginally worse terms on bulk silver because arithmetic, unlike senators, refuses to flatter emperors. He also pays a premium for older denarii when he can get them, then loans in new ones because small spreads feed big ledgers. Light joke one, he says his job is turning size into sesterces. His clerk whispers that some days it feels like the reversed eye in the markets you watch. Bankers' marks, small punches and cuts, multiply on earlier denarii. Dealers test and retest, leaving little crescent scars as if coins remembered every conversation. Quirky tidbit. Centuries later, archaeologists will sort piles of Nero's denarii by these tiny test nibbles, reading the city's anxiety like marginalia on metal. For now, a fruit seller weighs change longer than she used to, then smiles because apples remain apples and dinner remains dinner. The mint hums hotter after 64. Rebuilding swallows bronze and brick. Relief funds and performances swallow coin. A new palace teaches marble to rehearse. You walk through scaffold streets and feel how money touches everything even when you cannot see it. Wages for brickmakers, contracts for timber from the Apennines, drafts on provincial treasuries where governors become very interested in the definition of remittance. A centurion back from the provinces complains playfully that he now needs one more denarius to buy a good Gallic cloak. The cloak seller claims his sheep are nervous, and therefore pricey. Both grin. Both accept the new math because the city accepts the new portrait. Silver content is not just chemistry, it's policy. Reduce purity a little and the same or buys more soldiers and louder festivals. Rome has discovered the fiscal lever that future rulers will pull under worse weather. Press fineness when fronts multiply, and you need the illusion of deeper purses. You understand why it is tempting. You also feel the covenant hairline. Coins are promises you can touch. Change them too quickly and the promise speaks in a higher pitch. You pause at the docks and listen to a different voice. The Annona, the grain dole, a river of in-kind taxation that keeps bellies loyal when coin gets clever. Barges heavy with Africa's harvest slide under new bridges. Officials chalk allotments on boards with the confidence of men who know their arithmetic is wheat-flavored. This, you realize, is how the city cushions the metal's diet. When silver loses weight, grain and oil carry more of the political load. The recipe for stability includes bread measured by volume and loyalty measured by cues that move. Counterfeiters enjoy the fog. Plated pieces sneak in, especially at the edges of empire, and testers become chorus masters of suspicion. Tap, ring, scrape, sniff. Centralized control answers with sharper audits, tighter mint discipline, and the unromantic practice of melting suspect lots back into honesty. The engraver rolls his eyes and says he'd rather carve curls than count impurities. Light joke 2. A forger tries to pass off a denarius with an emperor's ear too small. The money changer says, Rome hears better than that. The politics of trust leak through temple doors. Priests accept offerings in coin and in kind and quietly prefer older silver for the treasury box, as if the gods keep their own hoard of good years. Meanwhile, municipal councils fund repairs with whatever arrives, noting discreetly that bronze buys bricks with less gossip attached. You sense the hierarchy of respect: gold for high politics and long-distance payments, silver for paydays and medium promises, bronze for the city's heartbeat: bread, lamps, baths, ferry fares. Around the campfires, pay remains pay, and the army's patience remains the empire's luck. Nero sweetens with donatives when applause matters. The legions, practical as ever, clap the way bookkeepers pray, quietly but in the right places. A veteran explains to you that small debasements matter less than late pay. A lighter coin I can spend, a missing coin I cannot. You consider how often governance is just that sentence sung on time.by evening. You sit with a poet who claims coins are mirrors. See, she says, holding up a fresh denarius. The face grows grander as the metal grows thinner. Rome is learning to spend simple. You agree and then order wine priced in yesterday's math. The tavern keeper brings it with a look that says you have both noticed the sign on the wall. We accept all lawful denarii, and both know why it needed to be written this year and not last. Light joke 3. When you tip, he weighs the coin theatrically, declares it handsome enough, and waves you toward another cup. Before you leave the mint, the foreman shows you bins of withdrawn issues, old coins recalled, res-struck with the new portrait and the new standard. He calls it making the chorus sing in the same key. You hear the efficiency: gather, melt, reissue. One emperor, one look, one ledger that balances for now. You also hear the precedent: once the chorus learns a new key, future conductors can tune it down again when storms arrive. Historians still argue whether Nero's reform was a panic scramble after the Great Fire, a medium-term plan to align money with obligations, or a vanity project wrapped in fiscal necessity. The balance of evidence points to pragmatic finance with decorative art: rebuild the city, steady the army, flatter the markets, and accept a slightly cheaper promise per coin. It worked, until it didn't, decades later, when repeated shavings turned caution into confetti. You pocket a denarius, legal, lighter, lovely, and walk the rebuilt streets where scaffolds cast evening ladders on walls. The city looks back at you on every reverse: altars, victories, personified virtues making speeches in tiny capitals. You realize coins are how an emperor shakes hands with strangers. Today the grip is just a little less firm. Tomorrow, a new dynasty will inherit the habit and either strengthen the handshake or file the fingers thinner. For tonight, spend the coin. It still buys bread, it still pays wages, and its portrait still persuades your thumb to trust your eyes. You step into a city that smells of wet ash and fresh mortar. The year of the 4 emperors finally folded shut like a bruised ledger. Vespasian has taken the chair, practical as a carpenter, thrifty as a steward, and you can feel the empire exhale because someone is counting again. Your pace slows to the rhythm of repairs: temple columns rehoused, streets retiled, a treasury that prefers arithmetic to anecdotes. The question is simple and heavy: how to pay for peace after a civil year that ate coin like a fire eats rafters. Start with the wall of bills: legions that must be thanked for choosing the correct emperor, garrisons that must be kept honest with punctual pay, a capital that wants its roofs back, and a world that has learned to expect spectacles as proof that history is behaving. Vespasian answers with the 2 verbs he trusts most: tax and mint. He doesn't hide it. He rarely bothers to decorate it. He likes revenues the way aqueducts like gradients: taxes first. Some he revives, some he sharpens, some he invents with a straight face. Mainstream anchor to nail to the counter, the fiscus judaicus, a levy laid on Jews across the empire after the temple's destruction, redirects the former temple half-shekel into Roman hands, dedicated to Jupiter's cult. It is collection as policy, and policy as message. He enforces older dues more strictly, chases arrears with the appetite of a city that remembers hunger, and lets the aediles remind markets that weights are a kind of tax too. He is not cruel about it. He is consistent, which feels like mercy after improvisation. Then the little bottle every schoolchild remembers. Fullers need ammonia to scour and finish cloth, and public urinals collect what biology manufactures on schedule. Vespasian taxes the traffic, the vectigal urani, and when his son Titus wrinkles an aesthetic nose, the father pinches a coin and delivers the line you can hear even over the hammering scaffolds: pecunia non olet, money doesn't stink. Quirky tidbit that also happens to be a policy seminar. The phrase will outlive both of them in every shop where revenue and taste quarrel. Light joke 1. A fuller tells you their guild motto is clean cloth, unclear receipts. The steward replies that Vespasian is working on the second half. On the mint floor, you watch standards climb out of the ditch Nero dug. Denarii recover a healthier silver, your ear hears a cleaner ring, and the aureus, trimmed in the previous reign, holds a shape that satisfies bookkeepers. Historians still argue whether Vespasian restored the denarius to near Augustan fineness or merely steadied it around the high 80s or 90%. Hordes suggest improvement, and the city's tone suggests relief. Either way, the message walks better: pay the troops with something that doesn't blush. Control isn't only purity, it's geography. The Flavians make Rome's mint behave and let the provinces help. Lugdunum continues to sing for gold and silver, Eastern mints. Antioch striking silver with a Syrian accent. Alexandria pouring tetradrachms for a regional economy that likes Greek on its coins. Pick up cadence so pay chests don't have to cross every mountain. Ephesus and other workshops strike special issues when logistics and propaganda agree. You trace tiny marks and styles with a finger and realize the empire has learned a map no road can show, a network of furnaces that turns ore into obedience. Propaganda pays dividends at the die face. If dia capta types spread, mourning palms, bound figures, a helmet on a trophy, coins that spend like money and argue like monuments. The Flavian amphitheater begins as a ledger entry titled Spoils from Judea. A ring in stone that promises the crowd the state is solvent enough to entertain. Mainstream peg. Vespasian funds Rome's great amphitheater, the Colosseum, with war booty and stabilized revenues. The coinage memorializes the victory on reverses that will be found in fields centuries later by men who will recognize grief in Latin. Light joke 2. A hawker outside the half-built stadium claims today's tickets are redeemable in 10 years. His friend says that's the safest bond in Rome. Municipal finance earns both sympathy and summons. The curiales, local councilors, become the empire's collection plate, responsible for quotas when neighbors fall short. Vespasian's order depends on their shoulders. Their letters to governors read like polite pleas laminated in anxiety. He answers with census discipline, clearer targets, and the occasional imperial grant where disasters chew through patience. The machine runs because towns agree to be gears. It is not kindness, it is stability, and stability feeds more people than kindness does. You walk a market with your ear tuned for prices. Bread is steady, oil complains in winter and relaxes in spring. Rent moves with the compass of rubble and repairs. The worst, the jumpy, tinny feeling of coin that lies, has eased. The money changer's knives leave fewer crescent scars on denarii. Older, good, pieces still fetch a nod, but new Flavian pieces aren't being side-eyed like strangers at a family meal. Historians still argue whether the early Flavian years saw measurable disinflation or merely a plateau after spiral. Papyri from the east and price eddies in the west make any clean thesis slippery. Your nose says markets have stopped flinching. Behind counters, administration hums like a workshop. Auditors visit mints with the look of men who count nails before buying a roof. Provincial treasuries learn to close their books the same week each month. The Annona keeps grain ships honest with schedules that sweat. When coin trust ends locally, taxes in kind fill the gap, and wheat becomes the empire's gentlest currency. A dock official tells you his job is keeping bread visible. He means that lines should move and that rumor should die where flour begins. The Senate's letters still appear on bronzes, SC, as if tradition writes the captions while the princeps directs the play. Light joke 3. A moneyer says SC stands for still consulted. The die cutter replies, sometimes considered. Both grin and keep cutting because paydays don't wait for wit. The public doesn't mind who pretends to authorize if the weights are right and the prices don't make breakfast into a debate. Not every measure smells like roses. The Jewish tax hardens lines, creating paperwork that maps identity in ways coins never had to. Tax farming persists in places, and collectors learn every loophole before governors do. Fullers grumble that they now pay for what cities used to ignore. They also admit the vats don't empty themselves. Vespasian's frugality shades into parsimony where poets want marble. Comedians survive by making thrift sound philosophical. You prefer your bridges functional and your ledgers legible. He does too. Quirky numismatic aside, Flavian portraiture leans into realism. Vespasian's weathered face, Titus's firm mouth, Domitian's neat hair, creating an honesty on coins that matches the fiscal tone. You can date a horde by cheekbones. Reverse legends talk in nouns, PX, Victoria, Equitas, confident, declarative, usable as small prayers even by people who have never met a priest. I in the East, Alexandria keeps its silvered bronze tetradrachms flowing with the old Greek numerals. In Syria, Antioch's silver pays troops who prefer their wages without long travel. Exchange rates between local and imperial coinage are the daily diplomacy of markets. A fruit seller who can compute better than a governor. A banker with a slate smooth from chalking ratios. The empire does not insist on uniformity where uniformity would be expensive. It insists on convertibility where war would be. By dusk you climb the seating of a half-finished amphitheater and look down at the floor where sand will one day muffle feet. You understand that the building is a balance sheet in stone. Proof that the center can stage a holiday without starving the frontiers. You also understand that the bills will keep coming. Danube garrisons, British weather, roads that eat gravel like boys eat figs. And that the best a prudent emperor can do is make coin and tax walk in step. Vespasian has done that. He turned a shouty economy into a hum, and a suspicious marketplace into one that counts without sighing. Historians still argue whether the Flavian fix was truly reform or just competence. Did Vespasian redesign Rome's fiscal architecture or simply maintain it better than artists do? The coins vote for competence. The mints vote for discipline. The markets vote for predictability. You vote with your pocket. a denarius that rings clean, a sestertius that buys what the reverse promises, a bronze that feels honest even when it flatters the Senate. You leave a coin on the rebuilt Capitoline as a quiet tip for the masons and walk home past fuller's jars that now wear the empire's idea of humor like a tax stamp. Somewhere a collector will save today's issues in a jar under the stairs. Somewhere a baker will spend them so fast they glow. Vespasian would approve of both. He likes money that moves and taxes that arrive. He likes mints that don't surprise him and jokes that pay for themselves. The purse is steadier tonight. Tomorrow, the Antonines will inherit a machine that purrs, and begin, gently, to ask it for a little more than it wants to give. You wake into a century that smells like warm bread and polished marble. The streets feel padded. The fountains sound confident. The coin in your palm looks as self-assured as a senator's toga. Trajan builds, Hadrian tidies, Antoninus Pius nods benevolently at receipts that arrive on time, and Marcus Aurelius, philosopher with a travel cloak, tries to keep calm while the weather changes. You walk slowly through markets that hum rather than shout and notice how prosperity can sing loud enough to drown out the soft hiss of metal getting thinner. Lay the money out like a placid landscape. The aureus keeps its Nero-era trim but behaves predictably. The denarius rings clean to the untrained ear, and bronze still buys lamp oil without arguing. Prices in ordinary shops feel steady enough that bakers can grumble about flour instead of coin, which is how bakers like to live. Yet when you sit with a numularius, the tester whose hammer turns rumor into sound, you hear him say, "It's honest, mostly, but less honest than yesterday's grandfather." He taps, scrapes, smiles a little sadly, and pays a hair less for the very newest silver. Mainstream fact for your neat column. Across the 2nd century, the denarius gradually loses silver purity, roughly from high 80s/low 90% under Trajan and Hadrian toward the upper 70s by the reigns of Marcus Aurelius and Commodus. While weights shift subtly, the change is not catastrophic. But it is measurable in hoards, assays, and the longer test cuts that money changers leave like punctuation. The coin does not lie. It murmurs. Meanwhile the army, that cheerful eater of budgets, keeps good time and asks for a little more drum. Pay had been raised to 300 denarii back in Domitian's day, and though no headline bumped shouts under Antoninus Pius, donatives and special distributions blush into habit, especially when emperors meet anniversaries, victories, and the need for applause. Marcus Aurelius, beset by northern wars and a plague that teaches cities new arithmetic about breath, finds that generosity is cheaper than mutiny and that bronze statues of virtues require bronze pay chests to continue existing. Light joke 1. A centurion quips that philosophy is fine, but wages do the better stoicism lesson. Prosperity makes the creep survivable. Trade runs like a polished road. African grain, Spanish oil, Egyptian papyrus, Syrian glass, goods that teach coin to travel without getting homesick. Hadrian's fiscal neatness leaves cupboards full of correctly labeled jars. Antoninus Pius gives the machine what it loves best: boring predictability. Taxes are assessed on time. Arrears are collected with the unoffended patience of clerks who sharpen styluses for fun. Provincial mints strike decent silver so the legions don't have to wait for Rome's furnaces. You feel the system purr and think, perhaps, that a slight diet in silver is a modest price for a city that keeps its promises. And yet small signals accumulate like dust on a ledger. In Egypt's papyri, rents and wages notch upward here and there, especially after the plague's first sweep. In military supply contracts, prices creep like ivy, slow, decorative, undeniable. Banker's post. Old denarii preferred. On tiny slates, then smile and accept the new ones anyway, minus a whisper. Historians still argue whether Antonine-era price shifts reflect debasement directly or the tangled mix of war disruptions, disease, transport costs, and local harvests. The most sensible answer is that everything matters a little. With coin quality adding a background hum, markets learn to equalize. Walk into a mint during Hadrian's tours and you'll see control disguised as curiosity. The emperor's face appears with travelogues on reverses, bridges, provinces personified with good posture, Restifter here, Disciplina there. Uniform dyes, tidy flans, audits that make foremen sleep lightly. The silver content still drifts, because numbers like to balance and expenses like to jog, but the workmanship flatters the promise. Quirky tidbit. Some testers scratch tiny bankers' monograms on edges, minute signatures that say, "I listened to this one, it sang acceptably." At the Annona Horia, grain warehouses, you watch the other half of stability, tax in kind. When silver's story shortens, wheat's story lengthens. Africa and Egypt's supply schedules Rome treats like sacraments. Dole days keep lines moving and tempers domesticated. Governors learn that a quiet quay is worth a year of elegant decrees. The empire has built redundancy into trust. Coin buys what grain does not, and grain forgives what coin forgets. Light joke too, a dockman says he prefers wheat to silver because wheat doesn't jingle when thieves walk. Marcus Aurelius complicates calm by being good in difficult weather. The Marcomannic Wars bite. The Antonine Plague takes coin out of hands and puts prayers into mouths. Donatives soothe troops who bury friends. Emergency minting runs hotter. Silver fineness tips downward a little faster. Still not a cliff, more like a slope that tired men notice first. A market woman tells you she now keeps 2 bowls under the counter, one for crisp old denarii, one for young ones, with friendlier alloys. She prices by feel and by loyalty. That, you realize, is what the century buys with competence, space for courtesy. Municipal elites, your curiales, continue to be the empire's volunteer accountants, backing local quotas with their own purses when neighbors dodge. In good Antonine years, the arrangement feels like status with benefits, seats at games, inscriptions on fountains, dinners remembered by poets. As the century tilts, it begins to taste more like obligations stapled to ankle bones. Some sell land to meet levies. Some petition for relief with the penmanship of men who slept poorly. The machine runs, but it squeaks. Meanwhile, the mint engravers enjoy portraiture as if virtues were easier to strike than to practice. Trajan's carved confidence, Hadrian's beard hinting at philosophy by a razor, Antoninus Pius's calm, Marcus Aurelius's thoughtful gaze. Faces that promise steadiness even when the alloy reads prudently thinner. This is propaganda as anesthetic, and it works the way good bedside manners work. The patient still swallows the medicine, but the room feels kinder. You sit with a philosopher official who insists that money is a tool for justice and that emperors should love balance sheets the way Stoics love moderation. He praises Antoninus Pius for not inventing emergencies, then sighs about the plague and says even a wise man must pay for wood when winter arrives. He does not mention debasement directly, which is how you know he has noticed it. He speaks instead of elasticity, a polite word for promises that stretch without snapping. Prices are not chaos. Bread remains within sighing distance of yesterday. Wine adjusts more by vintage than by coin. Long-distance luxuries, amber, silk, spices, care more about storms than about fineness. But contracts get longer, with more words around quality and delivery. Wages bargain more often. Soldiers compare donatives like old men compare scars. A papyrus from a fort lists payments in mixed coin and grain. The clerk draws a neat line between columns that reads like policy discovered by practice. Mainstream aside to pin under your lamp. Legionary base pay stands at 300 denarii for much of the 2nd century. The Domitianic raise, with supplementary donatives and rewards punctuating reigns. A major formal raise to 500 comes later under Septimius Severus. But Antonine governments still face rising real costs via war, plague, and the politics of generosity. Thus the temptation to fund gaps with silver drift rather than headline taxes. Entertainment remains the empire's mortgage on goodwill. Games go on, bad steam, theaters pretend to be harmless. The Colosseum's sand is raked with the same even strokes under emperors who count and emperors who quote. The average Roman judges the coin not only by alloy, but by whether the baker weighs fairly and the aedile inspects often. The state, to its credit, keeps inspecting. Light joke 3, an aedile taps a vendor's scale, declares it honest, and buys figs at full price. The vendor says, "Inspector, you spoil my reputation." By dusk you hold 2 denarii, Hadrian's and Commodus's, between thumb and forefinger and feel the difference your ear already told you. Not ruin, not fraud, just the quiet arithmetic of a state that bought peace, roads, quarries, justice, and funerals in large quantities and chose to shave metal rather than shave promises. Historians still argue whether this long drift primed the 3rd century crisis or whether the real damage came later from warlords, short reigns, and the Antoninianus' sprint toward tinfoil. You place your bet on the boring truth. Stresses accumulated, and when sudden storms hit, the ship already had a list. You leave the market under a sky that looks like good bronze and think about how stability often pays for itself in the coin of patience. The Antonines taught money to keep a straight face while losing a little weight. It worked, until the bills multiplied faster than the mints could whisper. Tomorrow, the Severans will buy louder loyalty and show you what happens when pay rises outrun revenues, and the quiet creep becomes a jog you can hear in every counting room. You wake to the sound of leather purses landing on a table like small drums, and you realize the drummer is Septimius Severus. The Antonine hum you grew used to has been dialed up. Pay chests are heavier, soldiers stand straighter, and treasurers start counting with that particular optimism accountants call temporary. You move closer and watch a simple sentence change the empire's metabolism. Raise the stipend, promise the donative, keep the legions sweet, and let the mints explain the rest. First the headline the camp repeats as a lullaby. Base pay for legionaries jumps from 300 denarii to 500. Mainstream anchor to pin to the tent pole. Under Septimius Severus, the ordinary soldier's stipend is increased, commonly reckoned 300,500 denarii, with generous donatives layered on, especially for the praetorians and for legions whose loyalty decided civil wars. The chest opens, names are called, stacks land. Men compare the pile to last year's pile and decide philosophy can wait. This is arithmetic you can eat. Pay is policy, but policy ripples. The mints run hotter. Silver fineness leans downward to stretch the blanket. Provincial treasuries, Egypt's granaries, Africa's ledgers, Syria's careful scribes, feel drafts through windows they thought were sealed. You sit with Anumularius and hear his verdict in rings and shrugs. Good coin, but younger. He sorts the Severian denarii into a bowl he mentally labels, confident enough, and starts offering slightly worse terms for bulk silver. Your ear tells you why. Assays will later show the denarius's silver content drifting into the 50s and then lower under Severian successors. The coin still sings. It now sings baritone. Severus buys more than loyalty. He buys permanence. He legalizes soldiers' marriages, turning unofficial families into households the state will meet in daylight. Barracks sprout cradles. Pay lists sprout dependents. Supply officers add shoes in smaller sizes to procurement tables. The army becomes more of a community, which is the tidy way to say, more expensive. Light joke 1. A quartermaster says rations go further when soldiers are single. A veteran replies that nothing goes further than a wife's budget. Taxes respond with the only language they know. More lines, more lists, more kinds. Coin continues to flow, but in kind levies. The annona militaris, gain teeth, grain, oil, wine, fodder, hides, and sometimes transport obligations that turn farmers into logisticians 1 week a year. The old city annona is now accompanied by a countryside annona with soldiers at its end, and you can feel policy need money and wheat together like a baker who knows both doughs. Governors write circulars explaining fairness. Towns read the subtext, punctual deliveries, fewer complaints. Inside the palace, a famous sentence is reported in whispers, true or polished beyond recognition. Enrich the soldiers, and ignore everyone else. Whether Severus actually said it or not, the budget behaves as if he did. Donatives blossom on anniversaries, victories, and convenient rumors that feel like victories. Praetorians discover their bargaining position. Frontier legions discover the pleasure of being courted. Historians still argue whether Severus's generosity was necessary stabilization after civil war or the opening act of a structural deficit. Did the army need this to remain coherent? Or did this teach the state to mortgage tomorrow's purity for today's salute? The paper trail offers both morals. Your nose says the rays bought calm and a habit. You watch the denarius change face the way tired people change shoes. Portraits thicken, laurels multiply, legends lengthen into titles that read like resumes written in capital letters. Parthics maxims, Britannics, Arabics adiabenics. Each victory has a mint run. Each mint run has a finest decision. Caracalla arrives with a new trick that you will meet properly in the next section. The Antoninianus, a double. That isn't. But even before that experiment, purity grinds down under the arithmetic of bigger pay and wider wars. Bankers begin to prefer yesterday's denarii for dowries and today's for tavern tills. The difference is small, but it is a difference, which is how drift feels from the inside. In forts, pay parade changes choreography. A centurion reads the scale. Stipend, deductions for boots, deductions for rations when the supply officer is feeling literal, and then the donative. Applause disguised as coins. A clerk copies receipts onto papyrus with the neatness of a man who knows audits now bite. Quirky tidbit. One Egypt papyrus contract from this era itemizes cartage for army grain by donkey days, priced in denarii and barley. Dual columns that show coin and kind sharing a ledger like old friends who never quite trusted each other. Markets learn to bend without creaking. Bread prices nudge. Oil jokes about being aristocratic. Rents care more about garrisons than alloy. A money changer scratches longer tesniks on sever and silver, and keeps a separate dish for very bright coins, a euphemism everyone in line understands. He pays a whisper premium for Hadrianic pieces when he can find them, then lends in Severan stock because margin lives in the difference. Light joke too. He calls the older coins quiet uncles, and the newer ones talkative nephews, and insists both make good dinner guests if seated properly. Provincial mints expand their role because distance likes solutions that don't walk. Eastern workshops strike silver with local accents. Antioch humming, Alexandria pouring its own logic. So legions don't starve while waiting for Rome's dyes to arrive in winter. Mint marks proliferate. Auditors travel with the persistence of geese. In theory, standardization. In practice, regional recipes within a shared kitchen. You trace the map with a finger and realize the empire's heartbeat now has many ventricles. Inflation arrives the way night does in summer. Late, then suddenly obvious. It's not a catastrophe, it's a new background tone. Soldiers grumble that the raise buys less butter than it did 5 years ago. Bakers tack up a second little slate with today's loaf, today's price. You still buy dinner without a sermon, but contracts grow more adjectives. Good oil, old silver, customary measures. Where coin stumbles, policy leans on granaries. Wheat remains the empire's most persuasive argument. You stop at the office where curiales, municipal councilors, wear exhaustion like a civic crown. Their quota letters arrive with precisely worded kindness. Their arrears are chased with precisely worded firmness. Some sell land to balance columns. Some secure imperial indulgences by reminding governors which towns never rebel when rebel season blooms. The system works because middlemen and women choose to keep choosing it. The price is insomnia. You bring figs. They count while eating. Severus's sons inherit numbers along with titles. Caracalla raises the estate tax paid by heirs other than sons and parents, a quiet way to convince parchment to exhale coin. He also grants the Constitutio Antoniniana, citizenship for free inhabitants across the empire, which makes tax and duty nets wider. Historians still argue whether that edict aimed primarily at ideology, unity, or revenue, more people under citizen taxes. The immediate fiscal effect isn't a trumpet, but the tax base does put on a slightly larger toga. Counterfeiters, always the opportunists, season the stew. Plated denarii circulate. Rural markets catch them late. Urban testers catch them early. Provincial authorities set up sting operations mild enough to make poets unamused. The penalty lists make for grim reading and prompt better training of money changers. Meanwhile, official debasement continues at a pace polite enough that sermons don't write themselves. The result is a spectrum of silver, old good, new adequate, bad illegal, 3 bowls behind every prudent counter. Camp humor adjusts. Soldiers stitch coins into belts now sewn a little tighter. Wives invent jars with false bottoms. A clever imaginator, standard bearer of the emperor's image, jokes that his silver portrait weighs less than it used to and receives a politely worded suggestion to keep jokes for after payday. Light joke 3. A pay clerk tells recruits their purses are philosophically heavier, filled with ideas about loyalty. The recruits ask if ideas buy wine. The clerk says they do when accompanied by denarii. By dusk you hold a sever and denarius that glints more enthusiastically than it should, and you feel 2 truths nudge each other in your palm. Truth 1. Raising pay stabilized an army that could have eaten the empire faster if unfed. Legalizing barracks families humanized the machine without unplugging it. Donatives purchased breathing room. Truth too, the bill came due in silver content, in in-kind requisitions that felt like taxes wearing boots, in a market that learned to grade promises by sound. Historians still argue whether the Severan turn marks the real beginning of Rome's monetary crisis or whether it merely exposes pressures that the 3rd century will amplify. Short reigns, frontier shocks, epidemics, and a new coin, the Antoninianus, that will pretend to be double while being 1.5 on a generous day. You tuck the denarius back into your purse with an affection coins earned by being honest about their compromises, and you listen to the distant hiss of furnaces where flans are being poured for a future that will need larger piles to buy the same piece. Tomorrow, the spiral sharpens. Debasements that stop whispering, the Antoninianus's theatrical math, and prices that learn to run instead of stroll. Tonight you sleep to the soft clatter of pay chests closing and the steady breath of soldiers who, for now, still say thank you when their names are called. You recognize the mood the moment you touch the till. Money that used to hum now rasps a little. The century opens wearing Severan generosity like a cloak and then spends 12 emperors teaching that cloaks burn quickly. You walk through workshops where furnaces are too busy to chat and mints that look like bakeries in a famine. Everyone is making more, and nobody is getting full. The story announces itself in a new coin that pretends to be 2 and is not. Caracalla strides on stage and hands you the Antoninianus, c. 215 c, helpfully marked by a radiate crown on the emperor's head so markets can tell, double, at a glance. It's valued at 2 denarii. In silver, it's closer to 1.5 on an honest week. Mainstream peg to keep your feet on the mint floor. The Antoninianus debuts under Caracalla as a nominal double denarius with a fineness well below 2 denarii. Over the next decades its silver content falls dramatically. Under emperors like Gallienus it becomes a thinly silvered bronze that rings like a bucket. You flip one in your palm and hear more promise than metal. Why? Because everything billows at once. Civil wars, frontier shocks, plagues, short reigns measured in haircuts, donatives as ritual rather than exception, expenses with the personality of tide. Mints answer with volume. The empire pulls the finest lever so often the lever wears smooth. Denarii continue briefly as a gentleman's memory. The Antoniniani take over like cousins who brought drums to a quiet party. You watch a foreman slide trays of flans toward the dies and mutter that logistics is a god nobody sacrifices to properly. Prices pay attention. Not all at once, not everywhere, but enough that shopkeepers acquire an extra slate and soldiers develop a new bedtime hobby, comparing how many loaves yesterday's pay bought against today's. In Egypt's papyri, rents, wages, and fees creep, then hop. In the West, market gossip develops a tone. Bring older silver if you want olives without philosophy. Your edile still inspects weights. Your baker still sighs about flour more than coin. Yet you can feel coin, for the first time, asking permission from bread. You visit an emularius who has given up pretending to be cheerful. He keeps 3 dishes now. Old denarii, early Antoniniani, and, later, bright but not persuasive. He scratches long test cuts on edges until coins look like they survived a cat. He does brisk business changing good silver into a heap of the new for people who have debts and patience. Light joke 1. He calls the heap opera in 5 acts, because by the 5th act everyone dies, of boredom from counting. Garrisons become the lungs of the problem. Soldiers like to be paid. Frontier armies like to be paid near frontiers. Provincial mints discover their athletic gifts. Antioch, Sicya, Rome, Mediolanum, Trier, Colonia Agrippinensis. Workshops sprout and migrate with emperors who prefer not to travel without faces in copper. Mint marks multiply, sometimes coy, sometimes proud, a tiny geography printed as punctuation. Auditors chase, inspectors sigh, and local recipes for acceptable alloy proliferate within a shared imperial cuisine. Historians still argue whether variations among mints were deliberate policy, to suit regional supplies and buying habits, or noise imposed by speed, supervision gaps, and/or quality. Hordes read like dialect atlases. Accountants read like meteorologists predicting yesterday's weather. Hordes, yes, pots and jars that become time capsules. A farmer in Britannia buries a heavy vessel in a hedgerow and intends to retrieve it when wolves stop reading rosters. A shopkeeper in Gaul hides a jar under a threshold and tells exactly one friend. A villa owner in Pannonia fills amphorae with radiate crowns that glitter like cheap disguises. Centuries later, archaeologists will count them by the tens of thousands, Cunetio, Ricadevnia, and their cousins, an archive of anxiety spelled in circles. Quirky tidbit: some hoards include cut-up silver vessels, tableware snipped into clippable ingots, proof that when coins misbehave, spoons audition for currency. Markets adapt with a competence you come to admire. Prices are chalked with more adjectives: good oil, customary loaf, military measure. Sellers offer discounts for bulk and older silver with the same look hoteliers reserve for repeat customers. In-kind transactions expand, wheat talks louder. Leather, cloth, and wine pay rents where coins tell jokes nobody laughs at. Governors formalize the annona militaris so carts go to camps without 10 arguments per mile. Garrisons accept barley where denarii ask too many questions. A clerk invents double columns, coin and kind, and copies them so neatly you think he has fallen in love with symmetry. Aurelian arrives in the 270s with the energy of a man who tidies warehouses before breakfast. He bristles at base money, slaps cents into mints, and into mint workers who have learned to help themselves, and rebrands the radiate coin with a truth in advertising stamp. The XXI or K marks that numismatists later read as a 20-to-1 base to silver ratio, about 5% silver in theory. He standardizes types, sweats counterfeiters, and for a brief bright window, makes coin look respectable again. Soldiers nod, bakers nod, bankers nod and still weigh. Your ear hears improvement. Your shoulders don't fully relax. The spiral slows. It does not end. Counterfeiters had been eating well, especially along edges where audits arrived like comets. Their tricks acquire a silver wash, literally, a chemical blanching that leaves a whisper-thin snow of silver on bronze so fresh pieces sparkle long enough to cross a counter. Testers learn to scratch through the perfume. Some buyers learn to accept perfume if the price adjusts. Light joke 2, a tavern keeper posts. No plated money except on plated fish day. Then invents plated fish day whenever the company is good. Credit, old, shy, useful, steps forward. Tallies and trusts get more work. I'll take 3 sacks now. You'll get my olives post-harvest. We'll price in a mix of old denarii and cloth. Collegia, guilds, act like safety nets and banks, funding funerals and floaters. Rich households act as informal treasuries. loans to clients, repayments in kind, ledgers that would make a modern regulator break out in pastoral metaphors. The empire does not become cashless. It becomes forgiving of arithmetic that doesn't jingle. Historians still argue whether 3rd century inflation was uniform and explosive or lumpy and regional, runaway here, manageable there, depending on war zones, harvests, mint mischief, and how much in-kind taxation replaced cash. Papyrus prices in Egypt zig where Western inscriptions zag. A fair sentence says the silver standard lost its authority, and economies improvise with notable stubbornness and occasional grace. You try the army test again, the only one that matters when borders rule budgets. At a pay parade under Gallienus, purses bulge with radiate crowns that look bold, and by modest. The men cheer anyway because pay is presence as much as purchasing power. In mess tents, complaints concentrate on supply, boots, grain, wine, more than alloy. A veteran tells you he still prefers coin because it fits in a belt and because wine cellars cannot be eaten in winter. He is not wrong. He is also not entirely right. Around him the army develops ration systems that behave like currencies of their own, marks on tablets, tallies at granaries, sportually that say, you ate. In administrative Latin.in towns, municipal elites perform a new kind of heroism, staying. Curiali's shoulder tax quotas that don't shrink when neighbors vanish into the countryside. A decent harvest year buys them a festival and a nap. A bad one buys them an audience with a governor who has heard every speech. Some petition for demotion to escape obligations. Emperors, needing pillars, say no with artistry. Local economies shrink to circles they can draw in a morning and expand in autumn if brigands go somewhere else. The machine stutters and coughs, but it hates stopping, and therefore doesn't. You pass a mint during one of the purges, false dies seized, foreman punished, guards watchful, and feel the odd comfort of discipline reimposed. Aurelian's reforms make style coherent again, flans fatten slightly, silver wash thickens. The emperor's legend promises restivter orbis, restorer of the world, while the reverse shows Sol, the unconquered sun, as if to suggest brightness could be hammered into money. For a year or two, brightness cooperates. Then Aurelian is murdered, and furnaces go back to doing what furnaces do, obeying masters who change faster than ledgers. Quirky social adaptation, coin cleaners. Street stalls appear where boys brighten radiates in vinegar brine and ash, rubbing until coins flash like optimism. They charge in kind bread, a cup of wine, or in the very coins they polish, which means their business model is also a philosophy. You watch a woman bring a bowl of dim money, leave with a sparkle, and buy fish at a discount for the effort. Cosmetics for currency, dignity for dinner. The century's end hands you a paradox. So much went badly. Emperors spinning through doors, silver turning to rumor, prices learning to climb, that you expect collapse. Instead, you see scaffolding, Aurelian tightened bolts, Probus planted vineyards and mended roads. Administrative habits hardened into routes bureaucracy could follow even when names on top changed before ink dried. The skeleton held. Which is why the next big act can happen. A soldier emperor with a surveyor's soul, Diocletian, will redraw taxes, rebase trust, and try to put price on everything you can carry, wear, or drink. For now, feel the spiral as a lesson in improvisation. People ate, armies marched, ships sailed. Money lost authority but kept momentum. Bakers accepted silver they scolded, Smiths took cloth and smiles and a promise written neatly. Governors measured tax in wheat and grass as often as in radiates, and radiates themselves wore honesty as a lacquer. Light joke 3. A poet says the coin is like a play. Grand names, per props, and packed houses. A banker replies that as long as the audience pays, the props will do. Historians still argue whether the 3rd century crisis was fundamentally monetary or whether money was the messenger for deeper fractures, political turnover, military overreach, pandemic demography, and regionalization. You stand in a market at dusk and decide that from the counter up, causation is a braid, weak coin pushes prices. War makes scarcity. Scarcity makes coin look weaker. Officials lean on grain. Grain learns to be law. The braid holds together just enough to reach tomorrow. You end the day palming 2 radiates. Caracalla's early, Aurelian's, reformed, and a late denarius from a drawer that smells like good years. You weigh them against each other without scales and hear the century in your hand. Heavy beginnings, noisy middles, disciplined defiance near the end. Tomorrow, Diocletian will arrive with census grids, head and land taxes, and a price edict that tries to nail vapor to a wall. Tonight, let the furnaces die down and the coin cleaners rinse their bowls. Money will dream of being silver again. Bakers will dream of being paid in wheat. You will dream of a ledger so neat even emperors hesitate to write in it. You wake to the sound of measuring cords slapping dust, soft thwips that mean money without coins. Diocletian has arrived with a surveyor's soul, and you feel the empire straighten its back as if a teacher just walked in with a fresh ledger. After a century of improvisation and coins that talk too loudly, the new plan is simple and stern. Count everything that breathes and everything that grows, map it onto a grid, and make taxes march in step with acres and ankle bones. You tug your cloak closer. Order has a way of making mornings cooler. Begin with the census, not the holiday kind, the kind that carries chalk and questions. Teams fan out with perdicky, measuring rods, wax tablets, and a patience that can outstare goats. They note fields by quality, vineyards by row, orchards by promise, households by heads who can work, and draft animals by how grumpy they look at dusk. Then they compress the countryside into 2 tidy baskets of words. Yugam, the land unit, a burden measured in soil and potential, and caput, the personal unit, a burden measured in labor and mouths. Together, capitatio jugatio, they fuse people and plots into a single tax sentence. Mainstream pegged to nail to the granary door, Diocletian's reforms reorganize assessment across much of the empire into combined head and land units, coordinated with a large-scale census and regular cycles. Obligations can be rendered in coin or, increasingly, in kind, grain, oil, cloth. So armies and cities stop waiting on silver's mood. You watch an assessor kneel, crumble dirt, and assign a number you cannot taste but he can. Vineyards receive strokes of chalk. Barns receive painted tallies. Households learn their portion of the empire's appetite. This is not a one-off spectacle. It is a calendar. Every indition, a 15-year cycle that becomes the empire's fiscal heartbeat, brings reassessment, lists renewed, burdens revised. Clerks begin dating letters, indition 3, as if years had suddenly moved into tax office apartments. It works on you. You feel time become administrative. Coin still circulates, but paperwork learns to eat. Grain dues fill horia that now behave like pay chests. Oil quotas gloss the empire's bread. Wool and linen deliveries clothe garrisons without asking mints to pretend. On distribution days, you watch carts trade for quittances, those neat receipts that let a farmer sleep, and notice how relief smells like flour. Light joke 1. A dock foreman says he prefers papyrus to silver because papyrus doesn't melt in the sun. And a veteran replies that papyrus does burn in campfires, which is why he pays on time. Structure multiplies structures. Provinces had already been subdivided. Now dioceses, administrative dioceses, sit above them like tidy trays, and praetorian prefectures sit above those, and the tetrarchy, 2 Augusti with 2 Caesars, sits on top issuing memos to itself with surprising efficiency. Mints are pulled tighter under central hands. Audits gain teeth. Officials discover the invigorating fear of being found interesting by the emperor. You sense a bureaucracy that has stopped apologizing for existing. You also sense villages that have stopped pretending they can hide. The tax unit's genius, its edge and its chill, is how it binds labor to soil without writing the word. If your field is assessed to yield so much grain and so many days of cartage, the person who holds the plow becomes part of the arithmetic. Freedom doesn't vanish, it acquires schedules. The colonists, already drifting toward stay put, pay up, now finds the calendar agrees with the landlord. Historians still argue whether Diocletian's system created proto-serfdom by freezing rural mobility or simply regularized obligations that were already hard to escape. The safest sentence is that assessment, once tabulated, dislikes surprises, and people who surprise it learn about fines. You walk with the assessors for a day and pick up small bureaucratic customs that feel like folklore. Quirky tidbit. To mark barns as counted, clerks dab a little red paint, cheap cinnabar, on the lintel. Children call it the tax kiss, and wipe at it with rags and games of make-believe repeal. Another. Sacks bound for state granaries often carry a lead seal, a tiny bulla stamped with an official mark. So if someone sidles off with a little extra on the road, the missing seal tattles before the grain can. You spot a boy pocketing a broken seal, threading it on a string as a lucky charm. His mother lets him keep it because luck, unlike grain, enjoys multiplication. In towns, Curiales stand straighter because there is less guesswork and more duty. Their quotas now align with the map and the indication. Arrears have procedures, not tantrums. They still pledge their own fortunes to cover neighbors who forget, but governors now hold tables that show where forgetting lies. Relief and punishment develop the crispness of recipes. Markets adjust to predictable requisitions. Bakers plan around delivery days. Oil sellers grumble that the state has learned to be a regular customer, the most dangerous kind because it never moves away. Coinage does not retire, it focuses. Bronze and billion, silvered bronze, keep the small gears turning. Gold begins a quiet climb toward primacy in high-value accounting. A story Constantine will finish with the solidus. Silver tries to behave. Reforms reset fineness here and there. Mints receive visits that feel like inspections and sermons. You turn a radiate piece with tidy XXI marks from Aurelian's cleanup and a newer piece with Diocletian's square-jawed profile and notice how style now argues authority more than abundance. The state whispers, if our money tires, our measures will carry you. You accompany a tax convoy, oxen, creek, dust, and realize logistics is politics with wheels. Convoys have routes guarded by schedules. Way stations tally loads with the scribe's watchfulness. River barges slot into timetables that read like prayers for good weather. A prefect murmurs that late deliveries cost more than weight, and you believe him because soldiers who eat on time smile at governors who prefer their careers unexciting. Light joke 2. A barge pilot says he navigates by saints' days. The clerk says the saint's name is Indition. The new order reaches into workshops subtly. Contracts begin to price not only goods but delivery windows keyed to tax calendars. Guilds, collegia, receive formal roles in state supply. Bakers bound to bake for the city, shippers bound to ship, leather workers bound to stitch army kit. Some of this already existed. Diocletian hardens it into expectation and, eventually, into law. The upside, steadier work, protected markets. The downside, obligations that feel like posts you cannot leave without paperwork. You watch a baker hang a wreath on his oven on assessment day. Half piety, half coping mechanism. Inflation? You still feel it, but differently. Prices stabilize where in-kind flows carry the weight. They wobble where coin must shout. Luxuries, wages in cities far from granaries, contracts that dislike being paid in wheat. Diocletian will try a grander answer soon, a price edict so ambitious it sounds like weather control. But this section's music is cadence, not ceiling. The mere fact of regular assessment and regular delivery narrows panic's playground. A fruit seller tells you she prices by season and by auditor now. It sounds like a joke and functions like a policy. Justice, such as it is, arrives with forms. Overassessment can be appealed. Underdelivery can be fined. Exemptions, imperial factories, sacred lands, favored cities, generate paperwork thick enough to serve as roof tiles. The poor learn that petitions work best when carried by patrons with correct grammar and clean tunics. You carry a letter once for a widow with a field that floods. The governor grants a reduction for 3 years, on account of the river's stubbornness. You decide the empire is a large household, stern, sometimes kind, always hungry. The tetrarchy's political geometry amplifies the fiscal rhythm. Regional emperors can enforce regional lists. A Caesar visiting a capital can audit a mint before lunch and a granary before vespers. Rebellions threaten the system less when no single hinge controls every door. The price is ceremony, more portraits, more edicts, more capitals wearing importance, but the benefit is sturdiness. A clerk in Nicomedia dates a receipt. In the consulship of so-and-so, indict Ion 8, and your bones believe him. Historians still argue whether Diocletian's tax reset rescued a tottering economy or merely disciplined a resilient one. Was catastrophe averted or order superimposed on improvisation that had worked well enough? The numismatics, papyri, and stones say discipline helped. Arrears fell in places where roads cooperated. Army supply improved where barges obeyed. Prices calmed where grain carried authority. The human ledger says something smaller and truer. Predictability tastes like sleep. By dusk you stand at the edge of a field turned into a table of numbers. The assessor closes his tablet, wipes the chalk from the barn lintel with a damp rag, formality that feels kind, and nods at the farmer with professional respect. They both know the year will still have weather, that wolves will still red rosters, that bridges still prefer gentle feet. But they also know when the carts are due, how much the sacks must weigh, and which seal to expect. You inhaled the disciplined air of an empire that has decided to prefer checklists to prayers. You walk home by a granary where the evening breeze moves through grilled windows smelling of wheat. A boy runs past wearing a broken lead seal like a medal. His father calls him, "Little prefect," and laughs. In a week or two, Diocletian will try to fix prices with an edict as grand as a mountain speech. Tonight, the reset you watched is quieter and more durable. The habit of measuring, the courtesy of receipts, the relief of knowing the state will take what it takes on a schedule you can plan around. For a tired empire, that's almost tenderness. You wake to the clatter of ladders against city walls, not for banners or wreaths, but for stone that will talk back. Scribes and masons are bolting a manifesto into the marketplace. Rows upon rows of chiseled numbers so neat they look like an oath. Diocletian has counted the fields, section 8, and now he wants to count the stalls. You stand beneath the new slab and feel its intention fall like cool shade. Let there be a ceiling for everything: wheat, boots, ship hire, soap, and the human hours that turn them into dinner. And let greed be denied the weather. Read slowly. The header booms with imperial gravity, a preface that blames boundless avarice for turning markets into storms and demands mercy for the poor and discipline for the rich. Then the tables begin. A modius of wheat, a modius of barley, the price of a shoemaker's labor per day, a mason's, a midwife's fee, a teacher's stipend, freight per mile for a mule cart, for a river barge, for sea passage, wool by the pound, purple by the pinch, boots, sandals, cloaks, hundreds upon hundreds of maxima, lined like soldiers who have been told to stand straighter than appetite. Mainstream peg for your notebook. In 301c, Diocletian issued the Edict on Maximum Prices, Edictum Depretis Rerum Venalium, a vast schedule fixing upper prices and wages across the empire, carving copies on stone in cities from the Balkans to Asia Minor and Egypt, with severe penalties for violation, often death for profiteers and hoarders. It is fiscal liturgy in limestone. Merchants crowd beneath with expressions you recognize, half relief. At last, numbers, half skepticism. Numbers have never unloaded a cart. A butcher traces a figure with his knife tip and mutters that oxen haven't learned to read. A schoolmaster, pleased to be noticed, calculates out loud how many days of chalk equal one pair of boots. Light joke 1. A barber says he will charge the maximum for bad hair and less for good. The edile says the edict sets ceilings, not taste. The edict's unit of account, denarius communis, the common denarius, behaves like a conversion keytying coin, kind, and habit into a single orchestra. You can almost hear the bureaucrats rehearsing, where coin has blurred. Use a ledger denarius to translate wheat into wages and freight into fish. Enforcement sharpens the melody. Informers are promised a cut. Hoarders risk confiscation and worse. Provincial governors are told to post and to police with a sobriety that declines jokes. Markets listen, then answer in the language markets prefer. Sidesteps. Ceiling is not price. It is a horizon. Honest sellers charge less and pin a copy of the slab beside their scale to prove piety. Nervous sellers whisper, "All right, but bring your own jar," inventing bundled services that keep the letter while teasing the spirit. In villages with more sheep than magistrates, transactions slide into kind. 2 measures of barley, 1 lump of salt meat, and the edict stone becomes a reference, not a commander. Historians still argue whether the edict failed quickly everywhere or worked briefly in some places. Eastern cities with tight administration, garrison towns with hungry oversight, before black markets and evasion turned it into a lecture. Surviving inscriptions, papyri with price notes, and the stubborn variety of harvests suggest patchwork. Enforcement here, theater there. You visit an edile's round of inspections and learn the choreography. He carries a tablet with extracts of ceilings and a temper that prefers teaching to fining. A wool seller tries to argue that his skeins are festival grade, and so deserve festival prices. The Edile smiles and sets his finger on the line that says, "Wool good." A shipper complains that North Wind should have its own column. The Edile agrees in principle and finds in practice. Light joke 2. A fishmonger asks if the edict includes a surcharge for slippery goods. The scribe replies that the surcharge is called catching them. The penalties are not a joke. The preface threatens hoarders with death, profiteers with public disgrace and confiscation, officials who connive with everything sharp the Latin language can sharpen. You see one shop shuttered with a wax seal, and the crowd go quiet in a way that says theater and warning have met. Yet you also hear the soft workarounds: sellers run out at legal prices and find stock at courtesy prices for friends. City elites, your curiales, intercede for civic peace. When zeal turns feast days into famine lines, the law draws lanes. Life creates intersections. Quirky tidbit from a provincial copy. Somewhere in Asia Minor a stone lists the fee for exotic animal keepers. Lions have a number. As if the edict imagined a conscientious trainer haggling with a conscientious edile about maximum roar per denarius. You cannot decide if this is sublime or adorable. Nearby, the fee for a muleteer is chiseled with the same firmness, reminding you that empires live more on mules than on lions. Behind the theater, arithmetic evolves. The edict ceilings often aim not at normal prices but at panic spikes. The post-siege loaf, the after-flood timber, the rumor-scarce olive oil. Where supply is ordinary, the ceiling breathes. Where supply tightens, ceilings bite and stock vanishes into storerooms until night. Governors then do what governors have always done: import grain, threaten hoarders, host public sales at legal prices, and hope weather turns their way. Price control is a bridge. Supply is the road. Only together do carts arrive. You follow a convo marked Annona Militaris into a town that has wrestled with profiteers and discover a peace the edict cannot write alone. Rations distributed at ceiling prices create a benchmark that private sellers imitate reluctantly. The army's stomach becomes monetary policy. A centurion laughs quietly that his men never imagined they would model thrift. He adds that they are also told not to undercut licensed bakers too much because civic peace includes bakers. The empire invents coordinated mercy and learns it is expensive. Teachers read the stone with mixed feelings. The edict values their days at this many common denarii. A mason gets that many more. A philosopher with a sense of humor tells you the prices prove two truths. Bread is heavy and ideas are airy. He still takes the posted rate and adds the oldest surcharge of all: patience for difficult pupils. Counterfeiters recede a step under the glare, but only a step. When margins tighten, fakery's profit shrinks. When shortages bite, risk becomes an investment. Testers keep cutting and ringing, courts keep frowning and sometimes beheading. The dance continues. You visit a black market alley at dusk, nothing to buy, nothing to see, and hear only the sound of feet that do not stop until the corner turns. Historians still argue whether the edict's failure, where it failed, was moral, greed, logistical, supply, or mathematical, ceilings set below sustainable cost. The sober answer distributes blame. A single schedule could not fit mountain villages and coastal emporia at once. Freight and weather laughed at uniformity. The list aged as fast as harvests. Yet the stone was not nonsense. It was a sermon with footnotes. Discipline prices where panic feeds on rumor. Dignify wages that had become bargaining chips. Remind cities that human need trumps theatrical greed. You circle back weeks later. The slab is weathering. Some figures are touched up and read by a conscientious scribe. Others are nicked where a dagger point traced resentment. Prices in honest stalls sit below the ceiling like careful birds under an eave. The illegal market continues its shadow opera, occasionally cancelled by the competent cruelty of a raid. The big effect is tone. Clerks speak more firmly, sellers more carefully, buyers more knowingly. Your sense is that the edict did not tame prices so much as it taught everyone to talk about them with the state in the room. Light joke 3. A tavern posts. Wine at the legal maximum. Joy at no extra charge. The edile orders a cup, pronounces the price righteous and the joy adequate, and moves on, which is the closest bureaucracy ever gets to applause. Mainstream aside to tuck into your ledger. The edict's text survives in fragmentary copies from places like Aphrodisias, Azani, Ephesus, and elsewhere, showing local adaptations and confirming the empire-wide ambition. Within decades, practical enforcement fades. Though the habit of publishing wage/price guidance in crises persists in smaller forms. The spirit, state as referee, outlives the letter. By night you run your fingers over the cold numerals and feel a kind of tenderness for the attempt. After a century of coins that lied, the government wanted numbers that didn't. It overspecified, because fear loves detail, and underdelivered, because supply loves reality. Still, the edict carved a memory into the wall, that in hard years, the state stood in the market and said, "Enough. Tomorrow Constantine will trade ceilings for anchors, minting a gold coin that behaves like gravity. For tonight, let the stone cool, the edile sleep, and the baker wake before dawn to price his loaves under a line that will never be as important as flour." You travel now by tiny letters, dots and monograms tucked in coin fields like compass roses. And you realize the empire has drawn a new kind of map, not roads, not rivers, but furnaces. After a century of improvisation and a price edict carved like thunder, Section 9, stability learns to speak through where metal becomes money and how the center watches the flame. You hold a fresh coin to the light and search the excerpt for coordinates disguised as pride. Begin with multiplication. One Rome cannot feed every pay chest, so emperors sprout mints where legions sleep and where ships actually arrive on time. Under the later 3rd century and into the Tetrarchy, the list grows like a muster roll. Rome and Lugdunum, of course, but also Mediolanum and Ticinum near northern roads, Sicca and Sirmium where the Danube's nervous stories begin, Antioch for the Levant's fast arithmetic, Alexandria with its old Greek habits, Cyzicus, Nicomedia, Heraclea along the Propontis, Aquileia for alpine throats, Trier for the Rhine's right now needs. Mainstream peg to keep in your sleeve. Late 3rd, early 4th century reforms rationalize a multi-mint system, each workshop stamping mint marks and Afrikaner letters so issues can be traced. The Tetrarchs, especially, bind coin to geography with administrative gusto. Mint marks are the empire whispering its return address. Piloin hints at London. Yes, for a hot minute the mist had a mint. PTR at Trier, SMH at Heraclea with the Sacra Moneta prefix priests of accounting come to love, Aeli at Alexandria, Anti at Antioch, Ram at Rome, LUG or little altar marks at Lugdunum. Afrikaner letters, Greek alpha, beta, gamma or Latin PST, announce which workshop inside the mint birthed the flan, like baker's marks on loaves. You feel your thumb turn into a customs officer. One glance and you know who struck, where, and roughly when, because style and mark travel together like twins. Audits follow the marks like weather follows seasons. Inspectors arrive with scales, assay needles, and the demeanor of people who write reports emperors actually read. They test samples, review die counts, compare output to bullion received, and ask the foreman why the third officina's product looks tired. The foreman blames fuel, humidity, the gods, and occasionally truth, overworked dies, new apprentices, alloy inconsistency in ingots sent from furnaces far away. Light joke 1. An auditor taps a coin and says it sounds provincial. The die cutter replies that the auditor sounds Roman. Both agree to add tin more carefully. Style standardizes because messages need uniforms. The tetrarchs decide that faces will look like office more than personality. Square jaws, bead diadems. A brotherhood of portraits marching in step from Nicomedia to Trier. Legends thicken. Genio Populi Romani with genius pouring a libation. Camp gates with turrets counting loyalty. Concordia militum as if soldiers could be coaxed into harmony by repeated nouns. When the regime changes, types flip like banners. Sol under Aurelian. Jupiter under Diocletian. An unstoppable sun again until Constantine recommends a different brightness. The mint map becomes a choir. The marks are section leaders keeping time. Quality control now piggybacks on cartography. If Sicia's bronzes show weak silvering, you know to nudge their allotment of flans toward workshops with better blanching baths. If Antioch's billion sings dull, you correct the recipe or the remelter's haste. If Trier's gold runs a hair too light, somebody's fingers are reading poetry where they should be counting. Historians still argue whether regional fineness variations were sanctioned, reflecting bullion supply, military urgency, or local buying habits, or were simply the noise of speed and supervision. Hordes and metallurgical studies catch patterns. Paperwork hints at policy. Your ear decides most differences were intentional enough to pass inspection and accidental enough to annoy accountants. Quirky tidbit. Some Afrikaner use symbols as inside jokes or pious nods, palm branches, crescents, stars, wreaths, tiny signatures that help modern catalogers sleep happily. At Cyzicus, a dot might wander inside a wreath like a child at a festival. At Aquileia, a little AQP ducks into the exerg as neatly as a boat under a bridge. Collectors centuries hence will argue passionately about whether that dot signals issue A or B. The foreman at the time likely shrugged and told the apprentice to set the punch straight next time. Logistics push policy. A frontier emperor on the Rhine needs coins that arrive before snow, not flattery mailed from Rome. Trier and Lugdunum handle west. Sicia and Sirmium feed the Danube belts. Antioch supplies the east and overlaps with Nicomedia to calm the Bosporus's moods. Gold often travels farther, fewer, higher value pieces escorted like letters of introduction, while bronze and billion stay regional, heavy with the smell of carts. The Annona's in-kind flows dovetail, coin for what cannot be requisitioned, taxes in kind for what shouldn't be priced in exasperation. A prefect waves a schedule and says the empire is a beehive. You watch coins and wheat swap flowers. Counterfeiting meets its most serious opposition not in courts but in marks. When a plated piece surfaces in a pay chest, the Afrikaner letter and midmark give the investigator a starting point. Was this ours gone bad or theirs trying to look like ours? A string of fakes claiming Antioch but found in Gaul suggests a local cottage industry. A suspicious run matching Sicia's style but wrong in alloy points to theft of dyes or talent. Raids follow. A smith who once blushed at his own cleverness now meets a penalty list that favors verbs. Light joke 2. A money changer keeps a board that reads, "We don't accept coins from the mint of probably. Please bring ante, TRP, ROM, or better manners." Mint workers become minor celebrities and quiet suspects. Die engravers carry in their heads the state's face cannon. Flan casters know the temperature a furnace calls honesty. Blanchers can sense the moment silvering turns from polite to tainted. Pay is steady. Oaths are serious. Punishment for theft is the kind of memory workshops never misplace. Yet conviviality survives. On feast days, an officina paints its letter wreath red. On promotions, a foreman gifts a friend the first coin from a new die, a keepsake and a confession of pride. Behind all this, Constantine is warming up with a gold coin that will behave like a proverb. The solidus is not here yet. Your hand can almost feel it, but the mint map prepares for it. More control at the top, clearer marks below. Bookkeepers who can reconcile shipments of bullion against issues without chewing reeds to the root. The bullion routes themselves become news. Spanish mines, Balkan streams, tribute in kind swapped for metal at state ratios, an alchemy of administration that turns ore into obedience and back again. You make one more lap of the map and see how marks tell history in shorthand. Piloin vanishes when Londinium sleeps. PTR flourishes when emperors like the Rhine. As Semen, Sacra Moneta Nicomedi, announces court proximity. Ailey keeps counting floods and still delivering bronzes that buy onions. During civil spells, rival rulers mint at rival cities. Identical legends, different hands, so that officina letters become partisan badges. Soldiers learn to prefer the portrait that will still be legal next year. Quartermasters learn to keep 2 ledgers until someone wins. Prices stabilize not because alloy perfects itself overnight, but because coin now carries traceable meaning. A marked, audited piece can be trusted enough to spend without a lecture. Where coin still stumbles, the tax grid, Section 8, and the ceiling sermon, Section 9, keep pushing panic toward the edges. Markets begin to sound less like rumor and more like grammar. A baker tells you he takes Antioch bronzes at Antioch rates, Trier bronzes at Trier rates, and gold at smiles. You suspect he is quoting a manual. You also suspect he wrote it. Mainstream aside to place in your pouch. By the early 4th century, mint marks and officina letters are standard practice. Scholars use them to reconstruct mint operation and imperial presence, mapping campaigns, capital shifts, and administrative reforms through metal. The system's transparency, rare for ancient states, helps modernize the ancient control, pieces of metal signed by place, workshop, and sometimes series, as if invoices had learned to circulate. Historians still argue whether the proliferation of mints reflected decentralization that risked divergence, or a centralized strategy of local responsiveness. The evidence, like most good evidence, points both ways. Rome designed the choir. Regions sang their parts, sometimes sharp, often sufficient. What matters to your pocket is the feeling in your palm when a coin says where it was born. It feels like accountability.at twilight. You line up a little row on a sill. Ante, ROM, TRP, SMH, AQP, ALE, and the exergs glow like a string of campfires across a map. Somewhere a notary is reconciling shipments with outputs. Somewhere a die cutter is squinting at a bead diadem. Somewhere an auditor is tapping coins and hearing geography. You blow gently. The marks do not move. Tomorrow, Constantine will make gold the empire's comma sentence. and those letters will become the indexes that keep his pages honest. For tonight, sleep with the comfort of coordinates. Even money, finally, knows where it is. You know the sound before you see the coin. Gold doesn't ring like silver. It settles, a soft authority in your palm. Constantine walks onto the fiscal stage with legions and bishops and, crucially, with a plan for gravity. After grids and ceilings, sections 8 to 9, and min-maps that taught bronze to behave, section 10, he gives the empire a sentence that doesn't wobble when spoken, a high-purity gold coin that means what it weighs, wherever you take it. You roll the piece across your knuckles and feel nerves quiet that you didn't know you were carrying. Name it, the solidus. Mainstream anchor to set on the counting table. Under Constantine, the solidus becomes the standard gold coin of account, struck at 72 to the Roman pound, about 4.5 grams each, very high fineness, replacing the erratic aureus as the empire's flagship and outliving empires that have not yet learned to be born. Semises, halves, and tramises, thirds, join the choir for convenience. Silver pieces, millurants and siliqua, and a variety of bronzes, the new AE types, handle lesser sentences. But the solidus writes the headline. Watch where he puts it. Not in street stalls, much. Ordinary bread prefers bronze and small silver, but in the places where promises must cross mountains still wearing their snow, army pay balances, long-distance trade, court salaries for people whose signatures can move wheat, tribute and diplomacy where optics matter, tax accounting at levels where grain carts become numbers and numbers become loyalty. Constantine doesn't ask gold to do everything. He asks it to be trustworthy where failure would be theatrical. You tilt a piece and read the tiny exurg, Conoun. Quirky tidbit, neat as a seal, that little legend. Constantinople, a brisum, refined gold, becomes a kind of brand, the state's way of telling merchants that this is court-quality metal, not rumor with lacquer. Other mints sign their own work, Rom, TRE, Ante, but for high politics, the capital stamp becomes a habit the market learns to smile at. Bankers, who are rarely sentimental, treat Conob like good handwriting. The choice of gold is chemistry and sociology at once. Gold resists corrosion and gossip. You can clip it, and so, yes, watchmen watch edges. But you cannot talk it down at a public fountain the way you can bronze. A solidus handed in Antioch buys cloth in Alexandria, pays a customs officer on the Hellespont, and arrives at a goldsmith's bench in Trier still answering to the same name. Historians still argue whether the solidus's stability derived mainly from administrative discipline, tight mint control, audit, consistent weight, from structural shifts, tax more often computed and settled in gold at the top, or from geology and empire, Balkan, Anatolian, and African metal flows sufficient to keep purity honest. The arithmetic of hordes and assays votes. All of the above. You visit a paid parade and see the choreography change tone. Bronze still clatters for rations and boots. Silver marks intermediate promises. Then a few bright discs cross the table for officers and arrears, and the tent seems to inhale. A centurion slides one into a leather purse already lined for the purpose, and says he trusts gold because even a liar will weigh it. Light joke 1. A clerk replies that he prefers bronze because bronze tells better stories. And the centurion says that's why clerks drink alone. The tax office learns a new elegance. Head and land assessments, Section 8, still yield grain, hides, cloth. But arrears, lump sums, and upper-level obligations are increasingly tallied in solidi. Governors forward gold to prefectures. Prefectures forward gold to the court. The court forwards gold to frontier problems and marble. You watch a notary write "Sol" in a margin with a flourish that looks suspiciously like pride. The change pulls accounting toward one calm line. Reconcile sacks and carts locally. Reconcile empires in gold. Money changers adapt with a speed that proves they were born ready. Rates between gold and the silver/bronze families float within corridors the state prefers. Testers bite, literally, weigh, and squint at edges. The better shops keep a little scale whose pans shine like well-behaved consciences. A banker develops a new pattern. Old denarii for your niece's dowry, solidi for the house itself. You recognize the argument because it convinces you doubt on the reverse. The message changes costumes with the regime. Soul steps aside as Christianity takes the dais. Victoria Avgg becomes wreaths and victories that bow politely toward crosses. Imperial portraits grow diadems that look like office rather than parties. Yet the metal under the type remains honest. The propaganda can trend, the standard may not. Historians still argue whether Constantine's gold policy was a coherent reform designed early or an iterative triumph discovered by governing. Was there a blueprint for monetary anchoring, or did fiscal survival choose gold one successful memo at a time? The continuity of purity across reigns suggests design that hardened into habit. You drift to a jeweler's stall and learn a social chapter the ledger's underreport. Solidus pendants bloom, coins mounted as amulets, stitched into garments, sewed into belts, portable savings accounts that also look good at dinner. In far provinces, a trimissus becomes a bride gift, its imperial profile peeking from a bezel like a shy uncle at a wedding. Quirky tidbit. In cold northern graves centuries later, archaeologists will find solidite pierced and worn. Testimony that trustworthy money can migrate into jewelry when banks are scarce and memory is precious. Not all reactions are applause. Some cities discover that when the court prefers gold, the strain shifts downward. Curiales must assemble bronze and wheat to match a gold figure on a schedule. When bronze is noisy and wheat late, men learn to make friends with people who own scales. The court doesn't stop caring about prices. Section 9 taught a lesson. It simply moves the keystone higher, where audit is sharper and temptation public. Light joke 2. A municipal treasurer calls the solidus the emperor's polite way of asking for fewer excuses. No one laughs loudly. Silver refuses to retire. It specializes. Soliloquy and milliarances, handsome, thinner music, serve pay packets and regional commerce. Their fineness wanders more than golds, but marks and mints tether expectations. Bronze does the walking. Coins pay bakers, barbers, and ferrymen. They inflate, deflate, debase, recover, are recalled, reissued. Life goes on. The trimetal system becomes a choreography. Bronze for velocity, silver for flexibility, gold for memory. A merchant from Aksum arrives with spices and ivory, asks for solidi, and immediately shaves a price because he prefers to leave with discs that don't become stories on the road home. In the Balkans, soldiers playing dice substitute bronze and vows. At the same time, a Gothic envoy counts gold gifts with care that would satisfy a bookkeeper. The coin stitches disparate worlds because it underwrites the sentence. Tomorrow will be like today. For transactions that cannot afford poetry. You catch a fraud once, clipped edges, cunningly remilled. The tester frowns, weighs, and declares the piece technically rude. Penalties are crisp. The lesson travels faster than merchandise. Here the mint map, Section 10, shows its second face, traceability. A solidus stamped connob that weighs light invites questions whose answers have supervisors. Constantine's auditors did not invent suspicion, they industrialized it. Light joke 3, an auditor says his job is listening for lies that think they're music. The die-cutter replies he prefers music that thinks it's law. Mainstream aside to keep your compass straight. The Constantinian/early Byzantine solidus maintains high purity for centuries. Its reliability anchors Mediterranean and beyond frontier exchange, showing up in hordes from Britain to India. Semises and tramises circulate. Later reforms adjust weight marginally, but the brand, solidity, becomes literal. When later ages rename it nomisma bezant, the concept remains, gold as international punctuation. Historians still argue whether gold's ascendancy worsens social inequality by privileging those near state and trade routes, or whether its clarity actually widened trust by giving distant towns the same rulebook elites already used. The answer in markets sounds pragmatic. Trustworthy gold helps everyone who ever needs to make a large promise. It harms only those who hope to renegotiate truth every Tuesday. By evening, you compare two handfuls. The old radiate bronzes that learn to sparkle under Aurelian's wash and a tidy row of solidi that quietly outshine lamplight. The bronzes make a cheerful clatter you know by heart. The gold makes almost none, which is the point. Bronze is conversation, gold is agreement. You put one solidus back into its pouch and feel, quite tangibly, the empire exhale. A unit of weight that polices itself, a portable oath that does not need a sermon, a budget line that can cross winter. Tomorrow the story will braid gold's calm with the Annona's in-kind flows, Section 12, the squeeze on municipal elites, and the late antique habit of mixing coin, credit, and paperwork until economies purr again. For tonight, let the coin rest where it cannot fall. And let your wrists remember how quickly fear leaves when weight and promise match. You walk where coin goes quiet and sacks do the talking. The road to the Horia smells of straw and wheat breath, and the counting here is by modius and sack, by ox step and river day, not by exergs or officina letters. You learned in sections 8 to 11 that the empire can anchor trust with gold. Here you learn how it feeds trust with grain, oil, wine, and cloth. Taxes paid as things that can be chewed, burned, worn, or poured. You slow your stride to the pace of a cart, because politics travels at exactly this speed when it intends to keep promises. Start upstream. In Africa proconsularis and later, in Egypt, fields become fiscal sentences. Farmers owe portions in kind, wheat above all, but also barley, beans, oil, sometimes wine, sometimes hides, and these dues are scheduled with the neat cruelty of a metronome. Assess an indition year, collect after harvest, move before rot. A village scribe marks quotas, a curialis swallows his sigh, and the road learns to host convoys that are half tax office, half pilgrimage. Mainstream anchor to set firmly on the granary step. Rome's food supply for the capital and armies depended structurally on Africa and Egypt. The Annona, state-managed collection and distribution in coin and in kind, moved millions of modii annually along sea routes to Ostia/Portus and up the Tiber, while provincial Annona militaris fed frontier garrisons with requisitions in kind. At Ostia and Portus. The choreography turns liquid. Grain barges from deep-sea hulks feed into river lighters, stevedores, backs and jokes, become fiscal instruments. Stamped sacks descend into vaults with the thud of policy behaving. You run your hand over a wall where tally marks rise like a stone abacus. Days receipts, weeks receipts, the nervous pride of a clerk who likes straight columns. Light joke 1. A dock foreman says his favorite coin is a full warehouse. And you realize accounting can sound like prayer when it's heavy enough. I in the city, fermentations, public grain distributions, quiet crowds the way lullabies quiet kitchens. Browns buys bread in markets, yes, but the dole sets a baseline. Citizens below a line receive measured grain at the state's price or for free in some rains. And bakers who grumble know that the edile can open a door in the Horia and make the grumbling sound like gratitude. Oil joins the chorus. The Annona Urbis expands, under emperors like Severus and Aurelian, to include oil distributions in amphorae stamped with state marks, lamps shining in alleys that now glow with administrative romance. Quirky tidbit: in some districts, amphora handles carried little lead seals with a ship and palm motif. Children collected the broken seals as tokens, trading 2 ships for 1 palm, with rules more stable than some emperors. You cross to the military lane, where the Annona Militaris turns obligation into logistics. Provincial communities deliver grain, fodder, hides, and transport days to forts. Scribes log donkey days and ox days as calmly as bankers log interest. A legionary eats bread from fields he has never seen and wears boots cut from cows he did not salute. The paid parade, Section 11, still dispenses coin, but the mess line dispenses policy, staple calories measured with a fairness that can survive winter. Historians still argue whether the growth of in-kind taxation under Diocletian and the Tetrarchs reflected silver's failure or administrative preference. Was this a workaround for bad coin or the rational choice for feeding fixed garrisons? The files you flip say both. When coin is noisy, wheat is eloquent. When coin is calm, wheat remains cheaper to ship from farm to mouth than gold to mint to oven. Follow 1 sack. A farmer measures, seals with a dab, sends off with a cousin. A way station clerk inspects the seal and scratches a line on a board. A river pilot curses a headwind and arrives anyway. A warehouse official weighs and exchanges the sack for a quittance, acceptum et receptum, that the farmer will show in winter when rumors pretend to be taxes. You see how receipts are sleep aids, pieces of scrap that say, "We are square," folded under pillows by men who dislike surprises. Light joke 2. A boatman claims the Tiber flows better after he has been paid. A clerk claims the clerk flows better after the boatman has signed. Where coin fails, the Annona becomes diplomacy. A city in shortage petitions the prefect for emergency grain. The prefect shaves allocations from calmer towns. The emperor announces a shipment with fanfare because fanfare is cheaper than famine. In frontier zones, commanders swap surplus barley for timber or salt with neighboring communities, an informal barter that needs no min-mark to be moral. The system is not flawless. Sacks rot, seals break, officers steal. But its very physicality resists fraud. An empty warehouse is harder to forge than a balance sheet. Markets harmonize themselves to this rhythm. Bakers plan around release days, using Annona grain for civic loaves priced with a public politeness, selling richer breads from private stock at a private song. Oil sellers become amateur meteorologists. When state amphorae flow, prices glide. When storms delay fleets, olive groves start writing editorials. Wine floats in a liminal zone between policy and poetry. Soldiers drink what contracts say, civilians drink what harvests deliver. and both learn that prices climb fastest when gossip does. The Edict on Maximum Prices, Section 9, left a language. The Annona leaves a pantry. Administrative texture makes the system human. Notaries copy tallies in duplicate and triplicate. One for the granary, one for the town, one for auditors who arrive like weather, and the handwriting alone tells you which office sleeps better. Overseers stamp outgoing loaves with a relief mark, a sheaf, a goddess, as proof of official flour. Children bite the marks because they like the pattern on their tongues. In a barracks, a clerk keeps two boards, accepta and ergata, received and issued, and the neatness of the columns is the difference between a quiet afternoon and a visit from a prefect who knows subtraction. You should meet failure, too. A late harvest crowding a late fleet breeds thin months. Hoarders hoard. The prefect threatens. The army offers escorted convoys. The city stretches rations by doctrine. Less per head, more days. In those weeks, coin grows shy. Bronze buys promises. Gold buys imports if the sea behaves. But the real king is barley boiled with patience. Relief convoys wear laurel wreaths on their prows like absurd saints. Crowds cheer grain the way they once cheered gladiators. If you want to know what the empire values when theater ends, watch who gets the first loaf. The curiales, municipal shoulders of the state, bear the middle weight. They assemble quotas, arrange carts, hire guards, and personally guarantee shortfalls when neighbors underdeliver. Constantine's gold, Section 11, settles high accounts. Curiales settle low ones with ulcers. Some petition for relief. Some receive honorifics instead of exemptions, which is like paying a bill with applause. Light joke 3, a governor says. Your city is the breadbasket. The counselor replies. Our baskets have holes, the governor says. Then you must be very swift. In the East, Alexandria's cytology, grain administration, runs with papyrus elegance. In Africa, the navicularii, ship-owning guilds, become semi-official, bound to move quotas with advantages and obligations engraved like anchors. The state trades privileges for service, tax breaks for guaranteed tonnage, legal protections for carrying grain in storms nobody else likes. This is the empire at its most adult, bribing competence to remain competent. Quirky tidbit, some navicularii stamped little dolphins on their lead seals. Pilots swore they sailed straighter if the dolphin looked pleased. Wider than food, the Annona logic clothes and warms. Army requisitions demand leather for tenting and boots, wool for cloaks, linen for bandages. Workshops in towns become state contractors with rhythms that match muster rolls. A tannery learns to prefer winter hides. A weaver aligns her loom to paydays. A blacksmith hammers nails by the thousand for wagon wheels that mean supply, more honestly than any coin type ever struck. The economy thickens into chains of usefulness instead of puddles of cash. Historians still argue whether the expansion of in-kind flows locked rural people into obligations that feel like early serfdom, or whether it protected them from coin volatility by letting them pay in what they had and knew. The answer near the carts is ordinary. When lists are fair and roads safe, in-kind taxes feel heavy but survivable. When lists lie or wolves read rosters, they feel like winter. The state could be both shepherd and wolf. The Annona taught it how to be one more often than the other. By dusk, you sit on a granary threshold warm from the day's sun and cool from the stone, listening to the city breathe with full bellies. A clerk closes his tablet with the fond slap of finished columns. A baker covers his cooling loaves with cloth like a mother tucking a child. A barge pilot ties off and tells the river to behave until morning. The gold in your pouch, section 11, is still there, heavy with promise. But what calms your shoulders is the weight of sacks that became supper, the honest fatigue of people who carried the empire's appetite without speeches. You fall asleep imagining the warehouse in darkness, grain settling with soft murmurs like a polite audience. Tomorrow the doors will open, the scales will creak, the cart ruts will deepen into a script the city reads without thinking. Money may persuade, but dinner prevails. And the empire, by choosing to tax in bread as well as in belief, learned the most adult form of mercy it ever practiced: feed first, count after. You start the morning with a noise you now recognize as civilization's metronome, styluses ticking on wax. This is not the mint, section 10, and not the granary, section 12. This is the council hall, where curiales, town councilors, turn their names into collateral. You sit on the rear bench and watch a dozen men, and behind the curtain of the minutes, a dozen households, shouldering obligations that a century ago would have counted as pride and now read like ankle weights. The agenda begins with quotas. The governor's letter, beautiful hand, unfunny numbers, arrives with the month's assessment. So many modii of wheat already en route, so many hides, so much oil, and a sum in gold tallied in neat sole. Section 11. The city's share is fixed. What is not fixed is which shoulders carry it when neighbors disappear into temporary absence. The councilors divide the total, then, quietly, pledge to cover the shortfall personally if collections underperform. Mainstream pegged to pin to the wooden dais. By the late 3rd and 4th centuries, municipal decurions/curiales were collectively responsible for tax quotas, arrears, and civic expenses. Imperial laws increasingly tied them to their curial status, making the burden hereditary and restricting avenues of escape. The clerk writes in the old heroic vocabulary, honoraries, but the sums behave like mortgages that reproduce. You follow 2 columns on the wax: accepta, received, and deficient, lacking. Accepta is tidy, thanks to the annona cadence you felt last section. Deficient is a stray dog that keeps finding its way home. A fish sauce merchant is ill, a tenant's vines froze, a potter paid in cracked amphory no one can eat. The council debates remissions with the compassion of men who know the price of mercy, and then does the arithmetic of men who know the price of penalties. Light joke 1. An aedile says he has discovered the imperial secret of multiplication. Turn 2 arrears into 3 letters. The treasurer replies that division is easier. Divide worry by the number of councilors. You step out with a curator of public works, one of those functional saints who can coax an aqueduct and a budget into agreeing, and trace his rounds. The bath needs roof tiles. The bridge needs stones. The market needs new tables before autumn. The imperial post wants fresh mules yesterday. All of this, by tradition, used to be sweetened by euergetism. Wealthy locals donating spectacles and porticos for inscriptions and applause. Now the applause comes bundled with requisition slips. The curator smiles with the courage of a man who keeps 3 lists. What the city needs, what the governor expects, and what we can actually lift. He shows you a cupboard of stamped lead seals for sacks, then a drawer of IOUs. You hear how the late antique economy braids coin, kind, and promises until civic peace purrs. The squeeze reshapes status. Being a curialis is still a rank. It also resembles a trap. Laws accumulate like barn dust, don't resign without permission. Don't join the army unless the emperor signs. Don't flee to a bishop's staff and call it piety. Don't sneak into the senatorial class through a wealthy marriage and pretend you never liked council meetings. Historians still argue whether this tightening was mainly a response to widespread curial flight and tax evasion or an administrative reflex that overshot and crushed voluntary service. Were councils truly emptying, or did the law create the panic it then managed? The paper trail shows both complaints and preemptions. Archaeology shows councils still functioning, which means the net, however blunt, held more fish than it frightened. You sit in on a hearing where a baker petitions for delayed payments on his compulsory city bread. His Annona contract specifies loaves at a ceiling price, Section 9, and flour arrived late on a bad river. The council grants a short postponement, and then assigns 2 members to advance him a small amount in bronze and oil, to protect the common peace. This is how elites become banks in towns that no longer court marble donors but beg for quiet ovens. Light joke 2. The baker thanks them and promises to stamp their initials on the underside of the loaves. The edile says initials are unnecessary unless the bread burns. Pressure makes habits. Wealthy households keep civic chests, reserves of solidi and sacks, to be deployed when arrears threaten public shaming. They are repaid in exemptions they will argue about for years and in public inscriptions that will outlast the roofs they funded. Poor households learn the routes to intercessors, bishop, notary, patron, each with a letterhead that can translate misfortune into a schedule. Quirky tidbit: some cities issue tiny lead or bronze tokens, tesserae, for distributions at festivals and emergency grain sales. Children collect them, and at least one counselor keeps a bowl of old tokens on his desk as a private reliquary of days we made it work. You ask about coin and hear a weary laugh. Bronze still pays sweepers. Silver pays contractors if the treasury is in a silver mood. Gold handles arrears when the governor's messenger waits at the door. The solidus is the court's sentence, Section 11. The council's language is barter, IOUs, and reputation. A mason accepts delayed cash because last winter the council found timber for his cousin after the flood. In towns where this memory economy persists, prices nudge rather than leap. In towns where miserliness or mischance starve trust, black markets feed on panic like clever pigs. Your feet teach you that the difference between those towns is not theology or climate. It is the average decurian's threshold for insomnia. Causes of squeeze multiply. Some are impersonal. Plagues hollow rolls. Wars move borders. Bad harvests make quotas feel like jokes told by weather. Some are policy. Imperial salary lines and gold create conversion stress below. Census reassessments, Section 8, add or subtract burdens with the accuracy of a polite hammer. Some are human, collectors skim. Scribes make errors that favor friends. An ambitious official turns enforcement into theater. Still, the machine mostly faces forward. Where councils stagger, governors replace individuals, not institutions. Where arrears congeal, the center remits a slice with ostentatious grace and very careful phrasing. A council day always includes a small procession of "Don't make me" petitions, a rich man lobbying to enter the imperial bureaucracy, and thus leave the council, a veteran aiming for a privileged exemption, a ship captain pleading that his navicularious obligation, Section 12, already ruins him. Decisions are half law and half community memory. A notary murmurs that the most important office in the late empire is the person who remembers last winter's favors. You agree. The ledger nods. Mainstream aside to anchor the mood. By Constantine's time and after, legislation repeatedly insists that curio burdens are hereditary. Penalties for evasion include confiscations and forced returns. At the same time, emperors issue selective reliefs and honors to cities that meet quotas or suffer disasters, a policy mix that alternates stick with laurel. Inscriptions recording curio benefactions continue, but their tone shifts from gift to covering the deficit. At noon, a messenger arrives with a request that makes the room hold its breath. Troops passing through next month, billet and rations for 3 days, fodder, bread, oil, wine, and a small list of, preferably, items that reads like a soldier's poem: salted pork, better vinegar, new sandals. The council calculates, compares to the warehouse stock, and delegates a trio to organize purchases at fair prices so the edict's ghost, Section 9, need not stand at the market door wagging its chisel. You walk with one delegate to an oil dealer who smiles and says he has been saving amphory for such a time as this. Translation: he guessed. He wins. The council's social life contracts to fit its math. Fewer spectacles, more roof repairs. Fewer fountains with witty inscriptions, more culverts that work. When they do sponsor a show, it is often an imperial anniversary with subsidized loaves. Because nothing buys patience like bread with music. Light joke 3. A poet recites an ode to Iquitas, fairness, while an edile counts loaves behind the stage. The audience applauds both, which is the point. Historians still argue whether the curios squeeze hollowed urban life, driving elites from cities and leaving councils as shells, or sustained it, compelling elites to invest in exactly the services that made towns livable. Archaeology in North Africa and the East complicates any single elegy. Baths repaired into the 5th century, new churches with civic funding, council houses patched rather than abandoned. Your day's walk shows threadbare resilience. Less marble, more maintenance. Less inscriptional boasting, more receipts saved in jars. By dusk, you sit on the hall steps while the clerk sands a stack of wax tablets smooth for tomorrow. He tells you he became a scribe because numbers don't shout. You tell him numbers do shout when soldiers are hungry. He laughs and says that is why he writes quickly. A boy runs past with a broken lead seal on a string, Section 8's, little prefect, and the clerk ruffles his hair with a hand that smells like beeswax and ink. You feel a tug of admiration you didn't expect. Nothing about today was grand. Everything about it prevented panic. Gold-anchored high accounts, Section 11, the Annona-fed ovens, Section 12, and the councils, tired, stubborn, often unfair, occasionally generous, bent without breaking. If tomorrow's harvest sulks, they will bend again. If the governor smiles, they will exhale. If wolves read rosters, they will write more letters and gather more seals. You rise, pat the lintel where older names are carved, and walk toward the market. Somewhere, a baker is stamping civic loaves with the council's little sheaf emblem, a mark that means, paid legal, and, we're trying. You buy one, warm and heavier than it looks, and decide that in the late empire, the true currency of towns is not bronze or wheat or gold. It is attention, paid daily by people who could have been elsewhere and weren't. You spend today learning to count with 3 hands. One hand holds gold that behaves like a proverb, Section 11. The second juggles silver that changes outfits more often than bishops change vestments. The third carries bronze, IOUs, and sacks of wheat that insist they are money when streets are hungry, Sections 8 and 12. You stand between a church porch and a tax office and watch how late antiquity pays its bills with a braid, coin, credit, and paperwork. Start with the ledger that now begins not with year of the consuls, but with Indaition 7. The 15-year tax cycle has become the empire's metronome. Clerks date receipts by Indaition as if calendars were invented in the treasury. A farmer's obligation lives in wheat. A town's arrears translate into gold. A workshop's wages fall in the silver/bronze weather between. Your ear hears a harmony, reckoning high in solidi, settling mid in soliloquy and milliarances, and greasing daily gears with the bronzes scholars will later label AE1, AE4, falls and fractions that prove small change can be valiant. Mainstream pin you can trust. In the 4th, 5th centuries the trimetal system stabilizes. High purity solidus as unit of account, silver denominations such as siliqua/milliarents for intermediate payments, and diverse bronze issues for everyday transactions, while assessment and dating by Indaition becomes standard administrative practice across much of the empire. Silver, meanwhile, is the middle child who keeps changing schools. Weight and fineness drift by mint and rain. Marks and Afrikaner letters, Section 10, keep suspicion in its crate. A pay packet to a frontier officer might list 2 solidi and 12 soliloquy. Then add a note that bronze will arrive with the next cart. Money changers develop personalities. The Antioch man pays better for soliloquy. The Trier woman prefers older issues. The Alexandria stall will weigh your silver and your patience with the same scale. Light joke 1, a banker posts exchange rates on a wax tablet. Under it he writes and exchanged moods, then rubs that out when the Edao walks by. Bronze is where life breathes. A baker prices civic loaves with sealing politeness, Section 9, charges a whisper more for honeyed buns, and counts in bronzes because fingers like to clatter. The fairy takes bronze, the barber takes bronze, the lamplighter is paid in bronze unless the council is feeling philosophical, in which case he receives oil. A money changer calls bronze stories with edges, because each coin has been scraped, blanched, reissued, and still finds a way to be today. You watch a shop girl bite one experimentally. She's testing habit, not alloy. Then there is credit, the city's unofficial 4th metal. Tallies and trusts do quiet work. A wine cellar offers harvest pay, terms. A mason accepts part wages, part grain. A leather worker delivers boots to the barracks in exchange for a promissory note priced in Seoul, and a delivery of salt next month. Receipts become amulets against insomnia. You have learned to love the phrase acceptum et receptum. We're square. As much as sailors love wind, churches enter as treasuries with consciences. Donations and bequests pile up as coin, plate, and land. Bishops become managers who can solve a famine with a storeroom and a sermon. In lean months a bishop opens the chest, buys grain at public prices, and shames hoarders with homilies that quote both prophets and the price edict's ghost. Quirky tidbit: some church treasuries inventory their gold by listing the saints depicted on each chalice. One chalice with the 2 Johns, so that a deacon doing a midnight audit can count both ounces and halos without mixing them. Light joke 2, a deacon claims he prefers bronze because bronze never asks which saint it is. Gold's calm migrates into habits. Wills increasingly value estates in solidi. Dowries quote a number of solidi alongside furniture and fields. Long-distance merchants demand settlement in solidi, or in sacks they can sell without a lecture. In a bishop's court, An episcopal hearing, friendly to reputation, a debt is translated. 1.5 solidi or their fair equivalent in wheat and oil, which is law learning to speak kitchen. The solidus doesn't replace other monies, it adjudicates them. Meanwhile, guilds, collegia, turn from clubs into gears. Bakers bound to bake, shippers bound to sail, smiths bound to hammer army nails, obligations priced partly in coin, partly in favors, and partly in "Don't make the governor visit." A shipowner in the navicularii, grain carriers tied to the city's appetite, section 12, keeps a private table of conversions. So many modii equal freight at ceiling price. Late wind equals surcharge that no stone has ever stopped. He smiles when he tells you that dolphins on his lead seals swim faster when the prefect is watching. The Curiales, section 13, play the empire's midfield. They convert market chatter into quotas and quotas into receipts. They know which bronze stalls accept soliloquy at generous rates, and which widows need their arrears translated into 3 smaller visits. They also know that late bronze is unforgiving in winter, so they hoard a little gold to settle the governor's messenger quickly. Light joke 3. A counselor calls the solidus the emperor's eyebrow. Lifted once, understood everywhere. Rural money talks in grain, rent, and favors. The colonist's obligations are priced in days and measures, then occasionally cleared with a coin he has never seen minted. A landlord's steward carries 2 purses, bronze for market day, gold for tax day, and a roll of receipts that prove the household is civilized. Historians still argue whether the spread of mixed payments, coin plus kind plus service, was a response to monetary weakness or an efficient equilibrium for a mostly agrarian economy. Your feet tell you the bland truth. Coin's reach seldom matches wheat's availability, and when the ledger can translate both, people eat more regularly. In the East, cities keep their civic heartbeat longer. Antioch's bronze reads like gossip with dates. Alexandria's accounts hum in Greek numerals with papyrus syntax. In the Balkans and Upper Danube, mints pair with forts so soldiers don't march on IOUs alone. In the West, bishops' treasuries and great estates increasingly act as fiscal lungs. They buffer shocks, finance roofs, and lend seed grain after hail. If you want to see social capital minted, stand at a church door on a dull day and count how many quarrels fail to start. Prices behave like weather, local, seasonal, and increasingly indexed to supply lines rather than alloy purity alone. The edict's ceiling tables have faded, section 9, but their grammar survives. Customary price, just wage, legal freight. When fleets run, oil is courteous. When fleets sulk, olive groves put on opera. Money changers catch the mood before poets do. They pay a whisper premium for earlier silver and smile wider at coins marked Kana because Constantinople's brand is shorthand for no conversation required. You spend an afternoon with a notary composing a mortgage. A tenant pledges vines as security, promises payment in bronze over 3 harvests, with a kicker clause. Or 1 solidus at the feast of Saints so-and-so. The clause is an escape hatch. The saint is a calendar. The notary sands the wax smooth with a tenderness that suggests he collects quiet endings. You remember the broken lead seal on a child's string, sections 8 and 13, and realize late antiquity trains even children to know what a receipt is. Failure flickers and gets handled. A clipped gold coin lands on a scale. The tester hisses, notes the mint mark, section 10, and follows the edge to a workshop that has been too creative. A run on a merchant's stall resolves when the bishop announces a sale from church stocks. At lawful measure. A shortage of small change is solved with tessery, little stamped tokens redeemable for bread. Because token, like bronze, is just another way of saying, we trust each other enough to meet tomorrow. Mainstream aside to tuck where your lamp won't burn it. By the 5th century, the solidus remains remarkably constant in weight and fineness. Silver and bronze vary by region and issue. Accounting commonly mixes coin and kind. Churches and great estates function as lenders and relief valves. Indition cycles organize assessment and memory alike. The result is not elegance, it is endurance. Historians still argue whether the Church's fiscal roles softened inequality by redistributing in crises or hardened it by becoming a parallel treasury tied to patrons and rights. The scenes you watch say both: alms that stop a riot, loans that bind gratitude to altars, audits of chalices and consciences on the same afternoon. If that makes you smile, it should. It's the human solution. Use every pocket that doesn't have a hold.by evening. You hold 3 items that cover almost every late antique transaction: a solidus stamped conub, a fistful of bronzes that smell faintly of garlic and lamp oil, and a receipt acknowledging 5 modii delivered, in good wheat, at a bishop's promise scribbled on the back of a sermon, and you could start a small town. You walk past a porch where a money changer closes his shutters and a deacon counts lamps, and you hear the city settling its accounts with sleep. Tomorrow the weather will test the system: wars, plagues, harvest moods, and the braid will either tighten or fray. Tonight count with 3 hands, then fold them. The numbers will still be here in the morning, and more importantly, so will the ovens. You wait to weather that refuses to choose a season, borders that move, ships that hesitate, and markets that learn to speak in conditional tenses. The late empire's purse you've been walking through, sections 1 to 14, now gets tested by everything with teeth: wars that don't keep office hours, epidemics that steal clerks and customers alike, earthquakes that shake granaries, and reforms that arrive like umbrellas after the first rain. You step out into the street and listen for what survives: the habits, the gold, the lists, and the people who keep counting when the room tilts. Start with the plagues, because they reset clocks. The Antonine outbreak, under Marcus Aurelius, taught coin to creep and patience to matter. The plague of Cyprian in the mid-3rd century turned funerals into timetables. The Justinianic plague of the 540s, arriving in waves like a tide that enjoys repetition, tested the solidus's calm the way a storm tests a lighthouse. Mainstream anchor to set at the quay, even as the mid-6th century plague and wars slashed population and production in parts of the empire. The gold solidus maintained high fineness and continuity of issue in the East, allowing long-distance payments and state salaries to keep their grammar while wheat and wages stuttered. You feel the difference in your palm. Bronze talks louder when fear is near. Gold lowers its voice and convinces. War, meanwhile, spends like a relative who visits. For a few days. Gothic armies, Persian campaigns, steppe confederations with excellent horse archers, each writes invoices on someone else's ledger. Governments respond with old tools made stricter, requisitions in kind formalized into the annona militaris, arrears paced in solidi rather than speeches, emergency taxes that swear they're temporary. You stand by a road and watch a convoy pass. Oxen, hides, wheat, iron nails, an index of how a frontier meal is a provincial afternoon. Light joke 1. A quartermaster promises this is the last urgent requisition. The town smiles because they have heard the very last one twice this month. Inflation is not one creature, it's a menagerie. In plague years, fewer hands harvest. Prices jump because supply took a nap. In war years, carts are busy with soldiers, not onions. Bronze stretches like a story told after wine. Where the solidus rules the account, stability leaks downward, sacks priced in soul. Equivalents keep arguments shorter, yet in markets without grain ships the ceiling, Section 9, becomes a memory that keeps sellers slightly honest. Historians still argue whether price rises in these centuries sprang chiefly from monetary causes, debasement in lesser metals, or from shocks to supply and administration, plague, war, transport. The best answer near the scales is that money magnifies whatever weather arrives. When ships run, coins seem virtuous. When ships sulk, coins acquire bad reputations for other people's storms. Cities that lose tax bases improvise. In the West, as imperial structures contract, new kings mint tramises, third solidus gold pieces, so that high promises still have weight. Bishops become treasurers with incense. Estates act like local anonas. In Gaul, a Merovingian tramisus pays for timber honestly because gold's arithmetic still fits in a foreman's head. In Italy, Ostrogothic and later Byzantine administrations keep Roman ledgers breathing with astonishing stubbornness. The East holds the center more tightly. Constantinople's Kanab brand gives merchants something to believe in even when the plague writes opera. The mint map, Section 10, shrinks and shifts but remains a map, not a rumor. You walk into an earthquake city, Antioch perhaps, where bread should be politics and is, but is also mercy. The prefect opens Horia. Bishops empty church cellars. Grain is sold at legal measures because everyone can do the math of panic. The edict's ghost, Section 9, isn't a cudgel here, it's a vocabulary. Customary loaf, just measure, no surcharge for rubble. A baker hands you a civic loaf stamped with a sheaf and apologizes for the ash. You forgive him. Policy does too. Plague drills strange habits. Contracts acquire survivorship clauses. Wills specify. In solidi or in wheat if markets break. Rent calendars shift to the seasons that actually deliver. Wages sometimes rise because hands are scarce. Sometimes fall because customers are scarcer. A notary learns to write, fair equivalent, with an elegant hand. A money changer keeps 2 bowls for silver, older and seasonal, and insists both are respectable if weighed by a patient clerk. Light joke too, a barber posts. Half price for survivors. The edile makes him erase it and then tips generously. Reform does show up, trimming and patching. In the late 5th century, Emperor Anastasius will overhaul the bronze, big falls with large numerals. Mu equals 40 nummi. Arrive like teachers who write on the board in letters the back row can read. A bronze arithmetic that helps markets count without swearing. The gold stays serene. The silver tries to be helpful. The bronze becomes legible. Mainstream fact to pin neatly. Anastasius's 498 coinage reform rationalized copper issues, introducing large marked falls and fractions that stabilized small change in the Eastern Empire's markets, even as gold solidi remained the high anchor. Quirky tidbit. Traveling scales, tiny folding balances, become common tools of anyone who counts for a living. Archaeologists will find them folded like snails of accuracy in shops and graves alike. Another, some households sew a solidus into the hem of a cloak as a secret savings account. There are winter nights when that hem buys bread without conversation. You watch a mother stitch and think she is as much a treasurer as the prefect, only kinder. The social machine redistributes courage. Curiales continue to stand in doorways calming rumors with receipts. Section 13. Bishops get better at feeding crowds without letting fists learn to speak. Guilds deliver state orders with the weary pride of people who have learned their town's appetite by heart. Grain changes routes when pirates or politics change winds. A fleet from Alexandria misses a season, and suddenly Africa is the city's favorite relative. The next year Egypt returns with a flourish, and the forum smells like river mud and forgiveness.do coins lose their way. Sometimes. Bronze goes thin in bad months. Silver sulks by region. Counterfeiters try new tricks when supervisors are busy being ill. But the solidus keeps the empire's long sentences grammatical. You can pay soldiers, hire ships, settle diplomacy, and value estates in a coin that sounds like the same truth in a dozen languages. Historians still argue whether that gold continuity preserved the empire or merely let it report its troubles elegantly. You answer by watching the bread line move. Elegance feeds nobody. But a stable unit of account lets grain become dinner. Point 3 Small jokes keep you human. First, a prefect tells a moneyer to strike more bronzes because the city is out of patience. And the moneyer replies that he doesn't mint patience, only coins. Second, a ship captain swears the price of freight should include a surcharge for omens. The clerk suggests a discount for calm seas. They agree to call it even and load anyway. Third, a market poet writes an ode to the solidus and rhymes it with solidity. Then admits it's not his best work but says the meter is stable. By dusk you have walked through a century's worth of bad weather and noticed what endures. Audit and habit, the grain fleets and the granaries, the bishop's chests and the council's ulcers, the little marks in the excerpt that tell you where truth was struck, and the gold that behaves as if tomorrow deserves a coin. The empire bends repeatedly. It doesn't like breaking. You fall asleep hearing the steady sounds you've learned to trust. Oars in a harbor, millstones at evening, the quiet thud of a sack onto a granary floor, and a coin settling into a drawer without commentary. Let the markets dim until voices become outlines and the numbers, finally, stop trying to impress you. Imagine a ledger closing with a soft sigh, as if wood could be relieved. Imagine the last barge tying off in a harbor that smells faintly of grain and candle smoke, the river turning from work back into water. You've walked far tonight, along roads that remember sandals and wheels, through halls with lists on the walls and kindness in the margins. And now the city invites you to sit where the stone is cool and the air is warm. Breathe in the simple inventory of calm, clean bread on a table, a cup that is enough, a small coin tucked under a weighty one as if learning to be serious by example. Breathe out the harder pages, the shortages, the taxes that arrived on time even when the weather didn't, the hours when silver asked too many questions. Watch them drift the way flour does in sunlight, then settle out of the air. If stray images insist on staying, the chiseled columns of a price edict, the ship that took one more day, the tiny mint mark that told you who had your back. Place them gently on a shelf. Let them be labels, not alarms. In this room, receipts sleep without needing your hand on them. In this room, the granary keeps its own watch, and the coin in your palm is only a circle of light, not a decision. Soften the edges of every street you crossed, the council hall with its styluses, the church porch with its baskets, the baker's door that opens early and closes late. Let their sounds recede into a steady hush, that late-hour orchestra of mills far away and wind under eaves. If a bell sounds, let it be an accountant's bell. One clear note, nothing owed, nothing missing. Your shoulders can lower now. The numbers will stay where you left them. The boats will remember their ropes. The morning will bring ovens, scales, and faces you recognize. For tonight, there is only the easy weight of blankets and the small, honest heaviness of a coin on the table beside you, keeping company like a quiet friend.